you miss me? I've been out of it comatose, but the depression.
Hello and welcome to Controlled Burns, the weekly hobby list podcast for me, your host, Andrew Burns, or Slow Burn from Wildfire Gaming. Once again, it's out of habit that I say weekly because we are not really weekly at this point, but we do still do a podcast. But it also kind of depends on how loosely you define the term, considering this audiobook project that we've been doing with Mick Foley's A Tale of Blood and Sweatsocks bestseller from 1999. And that's going to continue with this episode. I do want to get back to, of course, the regular podcast. And I was thinking about doing that now and taking a break from the audiobook. But the truth is, I have just been enjoying it so much that I want to keep going. And it's been, I guess, between a week and 2 weeks since I recorded the last episode, which got us up to chapter 19, which is where we're going to be starting today. I'm going to take us through another couple of hours of this book. So buckle up. Hopefully, you've been enjoying the ride if you've listened so far. Obviously, it's not quite the level of polish that you would get from an official audiobook, but there isn't one for this book. And so, if even a single person other than me and Reagan use it and enjoy it, then I've done my job. And quite frankly, just me and Reagan listening to it, I've done my job too because it's exposing her to this book that she wouldn't have otherwise read. So, with all that in mind, here is starting with chapter 19 of A Tale of Blood and Sweatsocks by Mick Foley. I convalesced at home while a pair of writers prepared an elaborate storyline that would air throughout my 12-week absence. Even though I would be off the road for 4 months, I would be back for television tapings after 3. I really felt like I was on top of the world. I could finally spend quality time with my son and wife, who was now 1 month pregnant with our second child, and I had just come out in one piece from a daring angle, which would no doubt set the box office on fire when I returned. I was confident that when my contract rolled around in 4 months, I would be well compensated for all my sacrifices. Everything was going to be just fine for the Foldies, right? Come on now, this is WCW we're talking about here, a company that could screw up a wet dream. Sacrifice, dedication, loyalty, they were seemingly foreign words to my employers. Of course they'd screw it up. One phone call saw to that. Hello, Cactus, this is Tony Schiavone calling. How are you feeling? Not too bad, Tony. What's going on? Well, I wanted to talk to you about your vignettes. How are they? I can't wait to see what they come up with. Well, one of the things that we've decided is that there's got to be some humor in them. Tony, to tell you the truth, I don't see anything funny about the whole situation. I mean, head injuries aren't usually a real comedic thing. I understand that. It's just that we feel we can't air 12 weeks of serious vignettes. It will turn people off. Tony, the vignettes are only a couple of minutes long each. Surely you guys can put some humor somewhere else in the show. I'm sorry, Cactus. We talked about it and we decided that this would be best. Jamie will drive by later and give you a script. After reading the script, I felt as if they had reached out with a steel-toed boot and kicked me, as Danucci might say, right in the ball. I saw my career and pay raise fading away before my eyes. In this script, I was to portray Cactus Jack as an escaped mental patient who, believing himself to be a veteran sailor, leads a group of homeless people to a better sense of purpose and self-respect. Wow. There was even a scene where a reporter attempts to in vain to get information from Colette as to my whereabouts, while Dewey causes havoc in the background. Unfortunately, Colette was not even allowed to play herself because, as Dusty put it, we don't think your wife ought to be so attractive. So a dumpy woman was brought on to portray my wife, a small piece of casting buffoonery that bothered Colette for months. Even today, when many people think of Mick Foley's wife, they envision the dumpy chick with the bad clothes and the droopy boobs. Not that there's anything wrong with that, instead of the white-hot chick who fell so hard for her battle-scarred ring warrior. I thought this whole thing had failure written all over it. I sensed that Eric Bischoff had some reservations about it, even though he had given the go-ahead to 3 days of filming for the vignettes. I was not needed for the first two vignettes, which consisted of a visit to the mental hospital and the aforementioned visit from the fictitious Colette. I called director Neil Pruitt, who is a friend of mine, and asked him how it went. Now, usually a director or artist of any kind is the first person to stand behind his work. I was expecting to say, oh man, it's great, or wait till you see this, you'll love it. Instead, his stammered answer was slow in coming. Well, Neil said, it's got a little more humor in it than I would like. Can you show it to me? I asked with a knot tightening in my stomach. I'll be right over, said Pruitt. I slipped the tape in my VCR and within 2 minutes saw all my aspirations crumble before me like the cookies in Diamond Dallas' bed. I could feel my figurative ball swelling to grapefruit-sized proportions from the low blow of the steel-toed boot entitled Lost in Cleveland. In the vignette, a tabloid like female television reporter seeks clues to find the missing Cactus Jack at the mental hospital he's escaped from. A helpful patient with a blanket folded over his lap eating cheese doodles with a toothpick and eerily reminiscent of Dusty Hoffman's Idiot Savant in Rain Man says, Jack, over there. Yeah, Jack's definitely over there. Running over to a man shooting baskets at a tiny basketball hoop, the reporter yells, Jack, Jack, is it you, Jack? Causing a man to turn around and say in a terrible Nicholson impression, Hey, I'm not making this stuff up. How's it going, nursey baby? Upset at this cruel hand the fate had dealt her, the reporter whines that she'll never find Jack. Jack, that's the Hoffman character. Cleveland, yeah. Jackson, Cleveland, definitely Cleveland. I lay down and waited for the swelling to dissipate. I wondered how this could have happened. It was as if a bunch of guys had gathered in a boardroom and said, Okay, gentlemen, what we've got here is an angle that people will believe in, a wrestler who was willing to put his life on the line, and a feud that's going to draw a ton of money. Now tell me, what can we do about this nagging problem? I know, let's make the fans feel like idiots for ever believing in anything we did. That way they'll be cynical and uncaring the next time we try to do an exciting angle on television. As for that wrestler guy, well, we'll show him. We'll make him the curse the day he ever sacrificed his body for this company. Let's make him look like a complete nincompoop. We'll show him. Head bouncing off the concrete and all that concussion business. We'll make a farce out of him, that's what we'll do. Gentlemen, you have my word that as long as I'm in charge, this company will never, and I do mean never, make a dime. Meeting adjourned. I couldn't envision this stinker ever finishing its 12-week run. What I could envision was the plug being pulled after about 3 weeks, and with WCW doing its "the fans won't know, we'll just pretend it never happened" routine. I'd be in worse career jeopardy than when I'd started this whole angle. Fortunately, I had an ace up my sleeve. Well, not an ace exactly, it was more like a ligament. It wasn't up my sleeve either, it was in my knee, and it had been torn some 4 months earlier during a match with Ricky Steamboat. I figured a ligament replacement operation would give me my 4 months off guaranteed. Dusty, I said in a call to the WCW offices. Oh yeah, man, I love them, Dream. I lied, hoping that the phone wasn't magically connected to a polygraph machine that would surely have been dancing out the charts. Yeah, while these things are running, I was thinking about having a little knee surgery done. What do you think? I had my fingers crossed. I can? Oh, great, yeah, don't worry. I'll be able to shoot the vignettes. I've still got 2 weeks, right? Oh yeah, I saw it. Loved it, especially the Nicholson imitation. Okay, thanks, Dusty. Bye. On May 12th, 1993, I had my right posterior cruciate ligament replaced with a cadaver's patella tendon. Sure enough, about 8 weeks later, Eric Bischoff pulled the plug on Lost in Cleveland. It was a mercy killing. Actually, I don't mean to be so hard on Dusty. It wasn't his fault. Like me, Dusty compared a lot of his ideas to movie scenarios, and I think his real career goal was to direct in Hollywood. The idea could have worked, but this was WCW's first attempt at using writers, and they let the writers take the whole thing in a ridiculous direction. Hey, I wanted to believe in the project too, especially when I showed up on the set and saw the elaborate scenery, props, and hordes of extras. Still, all the same, if you do have a copy of these rare sketches, resist the urge to watch them, even if the idea of a clean-shaven, eyebrowless Cactus Jack talking about mizzen-masts and nor'easters does turn you on. Instead, please, if you have any respect for me at all, burn it. Now to preserve the sanctity of my reputation for future generations. Chapter 20. I tried to put the whole Cleveland thing behind me and just enjoy my time at home. I was scheduled to come back at the September Clash of the Champions, and in the meantime, I rehabbed my knee with the diligence for my showdown in late October with Vader. I know most people don't think of Cactus Jack or Mankind as training hard for anything, but I think they've been misled. The truth is, I usually show up ready to go, and I've had long, fast-paced matches with some really well-conditioned athletes. Now, as far as being not all that impressive when it comes to lifting heavy weights, I'll plead guilty, but with a footnote that over the years my joints, muscles, and tendons have been through quite an ordeal. Over the years, when guys in the business have had less than stellar physiques, announcers have covered for them by claiming they had great tendon strength. Sometimes, as in the case of Dan Severn, it was true. I'm actually in the process right now of trying to get Jim Ross to sell the fans on the idea that I am one of those guys. Can't you just hear it? My goodness, look at that tendon strength. Foley is deceptively strong. Actually, it's one of the small comforts in my life to know that on any given day I can walk into any gym in the country and lift the exact same amount of weight that I did when I was a 16-year-old kid. I started getting the feeling that something wasn't right. This feeling started right after my return at the Clash and grew as my Halloween Havoc match with Vader drew closer. I was scheduled to wrestle Yoshi Kwan, a martial artist who was Harley's newest wrestler. He was undefeated over the course of several months, with the idea that if I beat him at the pay-per-view, I could start gunning for Vader. Instead, I watched in disgust as Kwan lost to Johnny B. Bad. He wasn't even booked on the pay-per-view. I asked Dusty about it, and he apologized for the error, but it didn't stop the company from airing the match twice more that weekend. After defeating the not quite as impressive Quan, I noticed some more small details that didn't seem to be quite right. As one of the better promo men in the company, and with a strong reason to seek vengeance, I knew that I could help sell this show on the mic. Instead, in the 4 weeks leading up to the show, I was given one live interview to build up the main event. In that same amount of time, Dusty gave himself 4 live interviews to promote the fact that he was going to be in his son's corner for another match. Priorities were definitely screwed up. Also interesting to me was the fact that I wasn't written into any of the television shows that would air after the Havoc show in October of 1993. I asked Dusty what he had in mind for me after Havoc, and he admitted he had nothing immediate. It was obvious to me that somebody somewhere didn't want a pay-per-view that Cactus Jack was headlining to be a success. It was more or less booked to be a failure, just like Stallone's Rambo felt when he learned the only reason he had been sent on a dangerous mission was that he was supposed to fail. I too felt expendable. It was in this atmosphere that I attempted to renegotiate my contract. In the history of wrestling, I don't think anyone has ever done more research or work in attempting to renegotiate. I presented Eric Bischoff with a 20-page, professionally printed thesis complete with charts, graphs, statistics, and analysis. My research had shown me that I was as valuable as anyone in the company, and as such, I certainly believed I deserved to be paid that way. I didn't expect the $750,000 that guys like Sting were pulling in at the time, but I felt that I deserved something. "You're preaching to the choir," Bischoff said, simultaneously stroking my ego and letting me know that all my hard work wasn't going to earn an extra nickel. "If it was up to me, I'd be glad to give you more, but my hands are tied here. What could I do? In today's open market, an unsigned wrestler headlining an upcoming pay-per-view show would be worth a fortune, even if just to screw up the other company. I wasn't in that position, however. The World Wrestling Federation had made it clear to me that they weren't interested, or at least J.J. Dillon had. J.J. was Vince McMahon's right-hand man, and the guy I got a hold of once a year when my contract came up. Every year, he'd give me about a minute and 5 seconds of his time. "Sorry, we're not looking for talent right now. You should be happy you're working. A lot of guys aren't, you know. Give us a call next year." That was it. They weren't looking for talent. The World Wrestling Federation was always on the lookout for talent. Excuse my language here, but I'm a little upset thinking about this. I was Cactus fucking Jack, and all I get is 1 minute with JJ fucking Dillon? Whoa, it felt good to get that off my chest. How about one more time? Okay. I was Cactus fucking Jack, and all I get is 1 minute with JJ fucking Dillon. 4 F words in one paragraph. Diamond Dallas would be so proud. Actually, as it turned out, Vince McMahon himself wasn't a big Cactus Jack fan, so maybe every year around the 1st of September he'd put JJ on a Cactus Jack alert with direct orders to get rid of that fat psycho, eyebrow busted open bastard. Jim Ross had continually pushed for me, but Vince continually dismissed it, saying, I found out years later, that I didn't look like a star. Yeah, Vincent, I guess Gobbledygooker and Mantar did. Considering the parade of stiffs who stunk up World Wrestling Federation rings for years, Vince ought to be slapped for insulting the hardcore legend like that. Or at least forced to watch an hour of Al Snow matches. No wonder I hit Vince so damn hard when I finally got the chance. Bischoff actually went down the WCW roster one by one, checking off names, either saying yes or no. Yes, they were making more money than me, or no, they weren't. I've got to admit, there were a lot of guys on that list who were making less money than I was, but I noticed one name that was conspicuous by its absence. "What about Jesse?" I said. Bischoff looked at me as if I just disgraced the good name of the Virgin Mary. He actually physically got out of his seat slightly and leaned forward, asking, "Were you in the #1 movie in the country last week?" Referring to Jesse's role in the Stallone flick Demolition Man. Now, Jesse was a good guy, and considering who he is, I should probably be kissing his gubernatorial ass, but the truth is he was paid an exorbitant amount of money to make jokes on the air and tell stories about the Crusher and Vern Gagne to the boys backstage. No, I had to admit, I wasn't. It was no use. Bischoff wasn't going to budge. I really had no other recourse. I had a family to think of and a child on the way in 2 months, and to make matters more difficult, Colette was dilating early and was forced to spend the last 10 weeks of her pregnancy in bed. I explained the situation to Bischoff and then said in a voice that was pretty near cracking with emotion, "If I take the same money, can I have the next 6 weeks off to spend helping my wife?" Knowing he had the upper hand, but really not being as big a prick about it as he could have, Eric said, "Cactus, you just had 4 months off." I pointed to our schedule that was behind his desk and pleaded my case one last time. "Eric, you've got me teaming up with Ice Train, a huge but green wrestler, in junior high schools in the Buckwoods of the Carolinas. How important could that match be?" Maybe a little of what I was saying was getting through. Maybe dedication and a track record of proven performances still meant something. "If you get the time off, will you sign for 156? He asked. "Yes, I will." I left the CNN Center that afternoon vowing that I would never let myself be put in that position again. Halloween Havoc was an artistic and athletic victory, but an emotional defeat. Actually, I was lucky to even make it. We had a match in Phoenix on Friday night, followed by a day off, and then Havoc in New Orleans. I left the house on Friday morning running a little late. I could never get the roof of the convertible to latch on just right, so as a result, I just drove all the way with the top down. It was cold this late October morning, however, and raining hard. Usually didn't matter, though. As long as I kept up a decent speed, the rain would usually just blow on by. Usually. This time it was raining way too hard, and I was occasionally having to stop for traffic. But I decided to gut it out. By the time I got to Atlanta, I was drenched from head to toe. I went to eat with my old buddy Robert Fuller. I ate a Reuben sandwich and promptly threw it up. To this day, I can't eat a Reuben sandwich, which had been a long-time favorite. That night, I stumbled through a match where I was so bad that I made Al Snow look like Satoru Sayama by comparison. I stopped at a gas station to get some liquids into my body. Funny, earlier that day, I had plenty of liquids hitting my body. A bunch of kids recognized me. Cactus Jack, they yelled as I went to open the door. Can we have your autograph? Fumfoo. I threw up everywhere, including on one of the kids' shoes. It was almost as bad as a night in Baltimore in which I threw up about 11 strawberry margaritas all over the room I was sharing with Scotty Flamingo. Wow, between the dry heaves, blood spitting, vomit, and urine, this book is starting to be a little more scatological than I would have imagined. Actually, as I've said, I'm not much of a drinker at all. Back in the days I'm writing about now, I would go out maybe half a dozen times a year. Nowadays, maybe twice. I just don't find going out to be all that much fun, and as Stan Hansen once told me, there's nothing good that can happen to you when you go out. For the sake of my marriage, my pocketbook, and my body's healing process, I'm much better off laying in bed, watching Nick at Night, or a movie, or reading a book, or once in a great while getting to know my body a little better. If someone asks me what the best quality a wrestler can have is, I can honestly say it would be the ability to enjoy doing nothing. Which isn't to say I don't do things. I catch movies whenever I pass a multiplex with time to spare, visit historic battlefields or monuments I see, and am the self-professed king of amusement parks. As a matter of fact, Al Snow and I almost had to go to wrestler's court to face formal charges of stranding Bob Holly at the airport in order to go to a carnival. We were guilty as hell, but we settled out of court to the tune of 2 nights free lodging, meals, and rental car, and the reimbursement of $80 that the cranky, curmudgeonly, I don't want to go to a carnival Bob had to pay for his own car. I guess you're wondering about how Halloween Havoc turned out, unless you want to hear more stories about how the guy you paid 25 bucks to read about is a socially inept amusement park obsessed loser who has been ostracized by all but a few of his fellow wrestlers. In addition, I have what Steve Austin considers the worst taste in music of any wrestler in the business. If, on the other hand, you're one of those Foley is God type of fans, I implore you to give Steve Earle or Emmylou Harris a try. Havoc was actually a tremendous matchup. Some people feel that it was the best match Vader and I ever had, and some feel it was the most brutal. I don't know about that, but it was definitely a physical affair that left me battered and bleeding from a busted eyebrow. No, Harley still didn't get to do it. The next time I go to Harley's for a barbecue, I'm going to let the poor SOB bust me open just so I won't have to have it on my conscience. When many fans think about Halloween Havoc 1993, they may recall a particularly painful move that, for my money, was the single most gut-busting suicidal maneuver I've ever tried. In actuality, I really was going to commit suicide. Career suicide. I was trying to end my career right there in the Lakefront Center in New Orleans. The plot to end my 8 years in the ring began when I placed a sleeper hold on Vader, who was staggering on the wooden ramp. A sleeper hold is a simple move that, in theory, deprives the brain from receiving oxygen by placing pressure on both carotid arteries, causing a man to go to sleep. Similar pressure from a different maneuver had helped me cost me my ear in Germany. In reality, nobody has won a match with a sleeper in years. It's usually just used to get a cheap pop from the crowd when you run out of things to do. But my sleeper had purpose. I jumped on Vader's back, still holding the sleeper, causing the mastodon to stumble like a drunken sailor with a 300-pound weight on his back. Here it comes, I thought, bracing myself for the pain and hoping that it would be severe. With a sudden burst of energy, Vader put my plan into effect. He dropped straight back while kicking his legs up in the air, literally crushing me between the bulk of his 450 pounds and the unforgiving wood of the entrance ramp. Vader rolled to the side, and I instinctively rolled into a fetal position, secure in the knowledge that my career was over. There was no way that a human body could endure such a blow, not without permanent damage. And permanent damage was what I was looking for. With all that force landing directly on top of me, there was no way I could continue. Bones, vertebrae, discs, nerves, something in there had to be shot. Or at least I hope so. A few years prior to this, wrestlers had started purchasing disability insurance policies from the prestigious Lloyd's of London company. Agents were more than happy to oblige them. After all, how much risk could a fake sport like wrestling carry with it? As it turned out for the Lloyd's people, it carried plenty. Most of the policies ended for generous payouts for career-ending injuries based on a percentage of what your previous 2 years' salary had been. What Lloyd's didn't understand, and in reality what few others do as well, is that pro wrestlers regularly perform with injuries that most normal people would consider career-ending. Unlike, say, a bus driver who takes disability and retires early, a wrestler with the same amount of injury would be getting suplexed and thrown around 20 days a month. It's considered part of the price you pay. The guys were not faking their injuries. They were simply taking advantage of what the medical community had established as being normal by being, in a sense, abnormal. Now, my payout would not have been that large because in comparison to others, my salary wasn't, but I certainly would have received enough money to get by for a few years until I figured out something else to do with my life. I was tired of wrestling. I was tired of the pain. I was tired of the lies. I was tired of the politics, and I was tired of the bullshit. I wanted out, and this was my ticket. There was only one problem. Me. My body had become so conditioned to taking punishment that it had somehow managed to take this. So I did the only thing I knew how. I got up, slowly, and then as in Germany, I went on as best I could. There you have it, a shocking revelation that until now I'd only revealed to Eddie Gilbert in the midst of a 3 beer buzz in Puerto Rico. To this day, I don't know if what I was attempting was illegal. I'm pretty sure I can't be arrested for it, even if what I did could be constituted as attempted insurance fraud. As it turns out, Lloyd's of London refused to renew my policy. I always imagined that one of the bigwigs from Lloyd's was watching TBS one day and heard Jim Ross say, "Look at Cactus Jack, with all the risks he takes, I wouldn't expect him to last much longer." So Lloyd's of London, a company that insures against asbestos, fire, theft, floods, and natural disasters, as well as insuring Mary Hart's legs, wouldn't insure Mick Foley, a simple entertainer. I kind of like that. Shortly after that match, I was asked by a fan on a call-in radio show what the highest moment of my career was. I replied that it was during Halloween Havoc right after I had drilled Vader with a foreign object at ringside. I looked up at the crowd and did a slow half turn, covering about a third of the arena with my eyes. Everywhere I looked, people stood in unison, almost like fans doing the wave. Except they weren't performing a rah-rah choreographer move, they were transfixed by the intensity of the match. It truly was a powerful moment. The same fan then asked what my lowest point was. My answer was simple. About 10 minutes later, when I knew I'd never be that high again. Thankfully, I was wrong. Chapter 21. Dusty finally came up to me with a plan for me. I was going to form a team with Max Payne. Now, Max was a great guy and we got along really well, but it was quite a drop from where I had been before. But at a certain point in that company, a point many of their current wrestlers are at right now, you simply stop caring as much and keep collecting a paycheck. I wasn't the only one getting the shaft at the time. The Hollywood Blondes, Steve Austin and Brian Pillman, were inexplicably broken up. Every once in a while, I'd hear someone talk about Austin and say he wasn't anything until he came to the World Wrestling Federation. The truth is, Austin was always good. He was an excellent television champion, and he and Pillman were probably the hottest team I had seen in years. They were funny, they knew how to wrestle as a team, and the matches they had with Rick Steamboat and Shane Douglas regularly stole the show in '93. Known Pillman off and on since late 1989, but had only recently become closer with him. A doctor had told Pillman that if he didn't stop drinking, he'd be dead within a few years, and he took the advice to heart. In addition to changing his ways, he made a conscious effort to change some of his acquaintances. Brian began calling me regularly and offering me his Pillman's pick of the week, which usually was a saying or a bit of psychological advice. I would then try to use his pick in an interview. When I left the company, I fell out of touch with him, and when I saw him again during a short stint with ECW, he seemed like a different person. Sadly, although we shared the same car on the night of his death, it seemed as if I hardly knew him when he passed. As I write this now, it is the eve of the Brian Pillman Memorial Show, for which I will wrestle to raise money for the future education of his children. I'm hoping that by helping his family after his death, I can make up for the fact that I didn't try to help them when he was alive. Amid all the setbacks and disappointment, the Foley family welcomed Noelle Margaret into the world on December 15th, 1993. I had wrestled that night at the Crystal Chandelier nightclub, teaming with Max Payne against Tax Slazinger and Shanghai Pierce. Yes, I was now reduced to wrestling in bars. I then went to the airport to pick up my dad for the holidays, went to the wrong terminal, and sat about 50 yards away from him for an hour while each wondered where the other was. When I returned home, Colette was waiting with her bag. Away we went, and I fell asleep while Colette endured the agony of labor without me. We tried to tape the miracle of birth, but I ended up bumping the camera and getting magnificent footage of the doctor's head. Maybe it's not so bad, though. I had a friend who actually had me watch footage of his wife delivering their baby. I almost asked if they had the tape of DDP and Big Cat Hughes from Fort Myers instead. 2 days after Noelle's birth, the wrestlers all gathered at CNN Center for our first ever meeting with Ted Turner. Now I respect Ted for his vision and his philanthropy, and he helped make a very good movie about the Battle of Gettysburg. But when it comes to his wrestling product, Ted was a little out of touch. It seemed as if the only wrestler in the room that Ted knew was Ric Flair. I know Rick wrestled there. Rick, how do you feel about that? Rick? Eric Bischoff may not have been a great announcer, and his later on-air heel persona may have at times made me want to throw a brick through my TV, but hey, he was no fool. He knew where his bread was buttered. Ric Flair became the new booker about 11 seconds after the meeting adjourned. The next few months were uneventful as I teamed with Max and wondered if I was going to ever get another chance on top. Bischoff had made the decision to curtail most of the road shows and instead concentrate on the television product. That was fine with me. If I was going to hate the company, I would much rather hate it at home with Colette and the 2 children. Reach. In March, we headed for Germany and the Hangman incident that cost me my ear. I called Colette the next afternoon from Germany, expecting sympathy to be showered on me. I had attempted to call home after my operation, but was told that Eric would take care of it and to get some rest. "Hi, Colette, how are you?" I said to the receiver, waiting for the sobs that I so richly deserved. Instead, I got, "The damn dog is barking. I think Noelle has an ear infection, and Dewey's being a grouch." "Did anyone from the office call you?" I asked slowly, already knowing the answer to my question. "What happened? Are you all right?" screamed Colette, apparently deducing from my question that something indeed had gone wrong. Well, I've got good news and bad news, I started. The good news is I'm coming home tomorrow. The bad news is that my right ear isn't coming with me. The hospital in Munich wanted to keep me for a full week, but when I found out all they were keeping me for was intravenous antibiotics, I convinced them to let me fly home where I would continue the IV treatment. I checked into the hospital in Atlanta where they assigned me a registered nurse and I headed home. Believe it or not, I was actually in high spirits because I just knew that no one could screw this angle up. I guess I should have known better. I showed up at Center Stage Theater the next week, raring to go, wondering what the brain power in WCW had come up with to take advantage of this unexpected gift. To me, this would be a Booker's dream. Forget the bogus knee injury angles. This was a certifiable gold mine. I mean, how could people not see the money in Cactus versus Vader? You tore off my ear, you son of a bitch grudge match. The match would sell itself. It would be too easy. It would. Oops. I forgot we were talking about WCW here. I had one more match with Vader about a month later in a little theater in Columbia, South Carolina, in front of 1,000 fans. Not exactly what I would call making the most of the situation. I knew also that all of Flair's talk about turning me into a top heel was bullshit as well. In some ways, I'm fortunate that I lost my ear, because if I'd let Flair have a say in my career for another year, I'd be cleaning pools right now. So when Flair is retired and the fans are singing his praises, and rightfully so, as one of the greatest of all time, I hope those same fans will remember that as a booker, this is the same guy that let both Mick Foley and Stone Cold Steve Austin walk away. With depression setting in with the knowledge that I had no future in WCW, I scheduled with Bischoff's approval an operation that would reconstruct a new ear out of one of my ribs and the cartilage behind my ear. Eric assured me that as the accident occurred inside the ring, I would be fully compensated during my 6 month absence. After that, it would be September again. Time to call JJ. I had one more match before the surgery, a Chicago street fight, an anything goes, falls count anywhere match that would see me and Max in a war with the Nasty Boys. I knew it was my last match, but I just couldn't get up for it. I wondered, how am I going to get through this without stinking the place up? The answer was simple: survival. Jerry Saggs broke a pool cue over my head, and Brian Knobs nearly dented my skull. The Nazis were sloppy as hell and more than a little dangerous, but they knew how to brawl. About a minute into this thing, I realized that I'd better start fighting, or I was going to get killed out there. About 3 minutes in, I realized we were in the midst of something pretty special. Saggs attempted to pile drive me on a table for the finish. The table buckled under our weight, and we crashed to the ramp. As I got up, Saggs pushed me, and I fell backward off the 5 foot ramp and onto the cold, hard concrete below. I didn't land flat, however, and I knew that my shoulder was injured, but at least I'd earned the right to rest, right? Not quite yet. Saggs hopped down off the ramp, and I winced when I saw Knobs throw him a scoop shovel. It was plastic, but I knew that this crazy bastard swinging it would hurt just the same. He raised the shovel high overhead, almost like an axe. I remember what Danucci had taught us about protecting our teeth and nose, and I turned my head to the side. Saggs proceeded to hit me about as hard as another human being could, but at least I'd be out of WCW. Man, you'd think I would have learned by now, right? I was awakened 2 days later by the sound of the telephone. It was Kevin Sullivan. Brother, I need a favor. Hey, Kevin, what can I do? Brother, Evad blew out his knee. I don't have a partner. Brother, you think I'm crazy, but I think if the two of us teamed in Philadelphia, we'd blow the roof off the fucking place. I tried to tell Kevin about my ear operation, but he could be a very hard person to say no to. His wrestling brother, Evad, was so named because his character supposedly had dyslexia and couldn't say Dave. The two of them were scheduled to take on the Nasties at the next month's pay-per-view, Slamboree in Philadelphia. Without a partner at Slamboree, Sullivan's whole stint with WCW might be in jeopardy, I felt. But in retrospect, I should have realized that, as Kevin had once told me, he was like the phoenix and eventually would have risen again. Later, Flair called and said, I want you to come to TV today. I tried to tell Flair about the operation, but he persuaded me by saying, we want to go all the way with you and Kevin. For some reason, in a decision I would soon regret, I went to TV. It would be easy for me to point fingers and blame people for bringing me back. The truth, however, is twofold. First, I felt that by going all the way with me and Kevin, my value would be raised and that I would maybe, just maybe, get that elusive pay raise, although probably for me, finding the Ark of the Covenant would be easier. And second, I really felt that wrestling in front of the Philadelphia fans might lift me out of the emotional mire in which I was walking. I really had become a miserable bastard. I hadn't cut the grass in 3 weeks. I had a 2-year-old son and a 4-month-old daughter that I barely had the energy to play with. My vaunted love-making skills were now barely adequate. Worst of all, I had rented Sophie's Choice and watched it twice, in a row. As mesmerizing as Meryl Streep's performance is, it's not exactly the type of film that makes you want to go out and dance a jig. The thought of a big showdown in front of my favorite audience was just the thing I needed. I went to TV that day with a renewed sense of purpose. Kevin and I received our old slaughterhouse chemistry, even though I was no longer in urgent need of advice. We were on fire until we went to Orlando. Orlando was the site of WCW's syndicated television tapings. Every 3 months, we would head to Disney MGM Studios to film 13 episodes of the most boring wrestling shows ever witnessed by human eyes. The wrestling was an attraction at the park, and a new theme park audience of about 300 fans was brought in for every new show. The fans would boo or cheer, according to a sign that said boo or cheer. So although the studio was noisy as hell, there wasn't an ounce of genuine emotion in the place. Most of the matches stunk, and because it was Disney, nothing that could be construed as violence was allowed. But because the tapings covered so many weeks of syndication, a wrestler was about to get a decent idea of where his career was going, and mine was going nowhere. Kevin and I were not on any of the television shows. No interviews, no angles, no run ins, no matches, no nothing. The second to last nail was hammered when I overheard Paul Orndorff and his tag team partner Paul Roma giving an interview about how they had defeated Cactus Jack and Kevin Sullivan for the belts. At this point, Kevin and I hadn't even won the belts. This was really not what I considered going all the way with this. This meant that even if Kevin and I set the world on fire as champions, it would all be for nothing. I was once again being booked to fail. Kevin and I had a meeting with Flair, and even though Nate and Sullivan had been friends for 2 decades, I did all our talking. Rick, a few weeks ago, you said you were going to go all the way with this, but I've been here in Orlando 3 days, and we haven't even been on television for 3 days. Flair, who only rarely drops his perfect gentleman manners, honored me by doing so. Hey, last I heard, you wanted to take 6 months off for psychological counseling. Flair then tried to draw a comparison between me and Barry Windham, who was at the end of nursing a year-long knee ligament injury. Barry had been paid the entire time to the tune of $8,000 a week. This was a perfect example of office gossip leading to factual errors, and the rare occasion that the old cliche, when you assume it makes an ass out of you and me, was actually correct. Rick, I said, I think you've got a few things mixed up. I did want 6 months off, but that was for ear surgery. I canceled that because you asked me to come back. I canceled that because you asked me to. Oh. I am seeing a psychologist for post-amputation depression, but even if WCW does pay for it, we're talking about $400, not $400,000 like Barry. And to insinuate that I'd milk any injury is an insult. Flair took all this in. So you want to wrestle? He asked. Yes, I do, Rick. Until my contract is up, you can book me on every show you run. The next day, I was booked in a Texas Tornado match with Vader. Actually, it was a Texas Death Match, but being in Disney, a few concessions had to be made. In Texas Death Match rules, pinfalls count, but they don't end the match. The wrestler has 10 seconds to answer the bell. The match continues until one man can't answer the bell. Vader and I picked up right where we had left off. We had actually been given a little leeway by WCW to get a little rough, and we took it a few steps further. I had Vader rocking and reeling with punches that were thrown damn near as hard as I could. I gave him a chair shot that had him seeing stars. I went for the elbow off the ring apron, but Harley tripped me and I tumbled to the floor. Vader then threw back the blue protective mats, and exactly 1 year later to the day that my foot and hand had gone numb in Atlanta, powerbombed me on the cold, hard concrete floor. Vader covered me for the easy pin, but the match wasn't over yet. The referee began his count as I lay prone. 1, 2, 3, no movement. 4, 5, I started to move. 6, 7, I was on my knees. 8, 9, Cactus Jack was on his feet. Then with the ref's back turned, Harley hit me from behind and I went down. 10, I lost the match. The loss, as is usually the case in our sport, didn't really matter, because in this case the real victory was a moral one. I had taken the powerbomb and had gotten up. Nothing could be simpler. I went to the back feeling like the weight of the world was off my shoulders. It's amazing how a good match can make you feel that way. I talked excitedly with Eric about the story of the match. I told him about the coincidence of the two matches occurring on the same day, 1 year apart. He agreed it was great timing and assured me that they would play it up when they aired on TV. Even though Jim Ross was working for the competition, I could hear his voice in my head. The referee is counting, folks, but it's just a formality. This one is over. What we really need is some medical attention down here. But wait, what's this? Cactus Jack is starting to move. My God, he's on his knees. Ladies and gentlemen, in 25 years, this is the damnedest thing I've ever seen. Cactus Jack is up. Cactus Jack is up. It didn't matter who was calling the match, however. This was too good to miss. Only a complete idiot could screw this thing up. I went back to our hotel, the Residence Inn. I couldn't stop sweating and I was lightheaded, but I was on a natural high. Even a probable concussion, I was in the mood to celebrate. We went to a place called Jungle Jim's and I scarfed down the biggest steak on the menu while Colette turned her back and breastfed Noelle. As good as my steak was, I couldn't help but feel a little envious of my daughter. Kevin and I were raising havoc every night with the Nasty Boys. At a show in Melbourne, Florida, in late April, Kevin and I were taking the fight to the Nasties outside the ring. I was working over sags while Kevin tried to get a fan's beer to throw at Knobs. The fan resisted, but Kevin physically insisted, and he let a three-quarter full beer fly. When Knobs turned around, however, it was obvious that the beer was not the liquid that had been inhabiting the cup. Knobs' pasty white face and a major portion of his bleached blonde mohawk were now brown. Tobacco juice was everywhere. Knobs reached with his hands and tried to clear it from his eyes. He opened his mouth and more came spilling out. He snorted, and some came from his nostrils as well. Sorry, brother, Kevin said, laughing with a warmth that would have made Bill Watts proud. May have been the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in wrestling, and that's coming from someone who's seen the Mean Street Posse in action. The next day, we traveled to Fort Lauderdale. I tripled up in a room with Steve Austin and Steve Regal. These were two of my favorite guys to travel with, and we were looking forward to having a good time. Now, never mind the fact that these three big time wrestlers were so cheap that they actually had three guys jammed into a flea bitten econo lodge. The key thing was that the lodge was right across the street from the beach, and having practically grown up in the Atlantic Ocean as a kid, I was going to be hitting the surf as soon as I could throw my trunks on. The three of us walked across the street, and I dove in gracefully and headed out to sea, while Austin and Regal soaked up some rays in the beautiful South Florida sun. I floated on my back for a few minutes, several hundred yards from shore, and when I looked to the beach, I saw that both Steves were gone. Then in the distance, I saw them walking back across the street. A minute later, I could see them sitting by the pool. That's strange, I thought. Trading the ocean for the pool? But hey, I wasn't going to let those party poopers ruin my fun. I frolicked some more. After a while, I headed into shore. I got to the sand, reached for my towel, and began to dry off. I looked around to see if any hot chicks had been checking me out, but didn't notice any. Sure are a lot of guys here, though, I thought. I looked at it some more and saw two guys holding hands. The idea that something was a little odd was starting to sink in. Then I saw two guys kissing, and the sinking process started to accelerate, as did the sprinting process. I don't think David Hasselhoff could have kicked up the sand any faster as I hightailed it off the beach across Highway A1A and into the pool area of the Fort Lauderdale Econo Lodge. Austin and Regal were laughing hysterically. You pricks, I yelled even while laughing myself. You left me on a gay beach. After the matches, we returned to the hotel and headed out to get something to eat. The hotel was located on the main strip of the city where plenty of restaurants were located, so we decided to walk. Hold on, guys, I said after we'd taken only a few steps. I just spotted a phone booth and realized I hadn't called home yet. You guys go on without me. I'll just sit somewhere outside so I can see you. I'll catch up in a minute. I began to talk, but within a minute or two, Austin and Regal were back. I was flattered. Man, I thought as Colette whispered sweet nothings into my ear, these guys must really like me. When I got off the phone, I realized that affection had nothing to do with their decision to wait for their company. There are fags everywhere, somewhat rattled Austin said. Yeah, added Regal in his distinguished British way. The whole bloomin' street is filled with Durnamashers. I quickly sized up the situation. Regal, a handsome blond chap, was wearing a casual ensemble of golf shirt, tennis shoes, and flip-flops. Austin, who at this point in his career also had short blonde hair, was wearing a Gold's Gym tank top, high tops, and a pair of decidedly non-toughest SOB in wrestling-looking fluorescent pink shorts. As two good-looking, well-toned blonde guys walking through what was apparently a gay area of town, they would look like a couple of pinup candidates for Honcho magazine. Add a big, hairy, ugly guy like Cactus Jack into the mix, however, and the picture was a little more innocent. We sat down outside at a little restaurant and ordered from the menu. Austin ordered a grilled chicken dinner and a white wine spritzer. No, just kidding. It was a beer. Regal ordered a hamburger, but asked that the extra cheese be parted with a napkin to make it healthier, or patted with a napkin. I too asked for a burger, but asked that the napkin used on Regal's beef be wrung out and dripped on mine. I'm sorry, the waitress said, looking as if she were at the end of a long day. Our cook is pretty drunk. He can make you a cold sandwich, though. The three of us thought about it, but opted instead to just order beverages. I looked at the table. There was a big splatter of picante sauce on it that had been bothering me since we sat down. I've been involved in some of the grisliest matches in wrestling history, but for some reason I hate to look at food that has already been eaten, especially tomato-based products like picante sauce. Excuse me, ma'am, I said, but would you mind cleaning off our table? The waitress sprung into action. With one quick movement, her hand hit the table, and with only the sound of bare flesh sweeping plastic, the aromatic mixture of tomato, onions, and cilantro spilled to the cold concrete floor below. Then, looking at her forefinger with an equally quick sucking action, vanquished the remnants. On the turn-off scale, it might have been on par with the Test versus Rodney, but it was damn close. The next morning, we woke up and fumbled through the television stations and the remote control. Let's keep it there, I requested when the sterile ambience of WCW Worldwide flickered onto the screen. My match with Vader was on. Boom, boom, boom. I was really nailing Big Leon. I was nervous with anticipation as Vader threw back the mat. They hadn't made reference to the injury of exactly 1 year ago yet, but now the story would surely unfold. Vader picked me up for the power bomb and sent me crashing down to the concrete. Splat. To tell you the truth, this one actually looked more devastating than the one in '93. I listened for the brilliant call. Sometimes the right words can really cement an image in the man's minds. Here it comes. Bobby Heenan was the first to comment on the historic career-turning moment. That'll give you Excedrin headache number 9, said the brain with about as much raw, naked emotion as Al Gore on sedatives. Indeed it will, added Giovanni, then nothing. Or nothing that I had suggested, visualized. Nothing. Hoped for, or at least in a worst-case scenario would have settled for. No, my God, he's on his knees. No, this is the damnedest thing I've ever seen. No, 1 year ago to this very day. No talk about last year's injury, no moral victory, just Excedrin headache number 9. I'd said it would take a total idiot to screw it up, and by golly, they hadn't let me down. This was the final nail. I thought about it for 2 days and made my decision to quit World Championship Wrestling. Chapter 22. Leaving a six-figure job is not an easy decision to make, especially with the uncertainty of the independent wrestling scene. Bischoff was surprised when I told him the news, but he did not seem all that upset about it. Colette was a different story. What do you mean you're leaving? You got a 4-month-old daughter, Mickey, Colette yelled, trying to reason with me. We'll be all right, I assured her. I can work lots of places. But you can't make this kind of money anywhere else, she continued. Listen, hun, if I stick around, I will be worthless within a year, I fired back. At least this way, I can buy some time and maybe come back when things are different. The wrestlers were surprised as well. Arn Anderson walked up to me shortly after he heard of my decision and asked about it. Jack, we aren't even working as much anymore. Why would you want to leave? Now, Arn was a guy I respected, and I wanted him to understand my motivation. Double A, I began as I searched for words that wouldn't include blasting Flair, who was a close friend of his. I've worked too hard for too long to have a joke made out of my career. I then recounted the Excedrin headache number 9 example. Point well taken, Arn agreed. 4 months is a hell of a long time to give notice for. Usually, when a guy is on his way out, the company resorts to burying his career with defeat after defeat on television or simply phasing him out. A guy can suffer a lot of defeats in 4 months. Looking back, I probably should have just rescheduled my surgery and taken off after the Philadelphia show. That way, I could have come back, collected money, left the company on good terms, and with the right ear, no less. For some reason, that's not my style. That would be like me hitting a wiffle ball to right field, or like my dad hiring a typist to finish his dissertation. The easy way just wasn't in the Foley blood. Instead, I forged on, almost daring them to bury me. In a shocking reversal of company policy, they didn't. As a matter of fact, they pushed the hell out of me, at least for a little while. For the next 4 months, Cactus Jack was all over the television. Never once, however, did anyone try to persuade me to stay. In the 7 months since I had signed my contract, someone must have authorized Bischoff to open up the purse strings, as wrestlers who had never worked a main event match in their lives began cashing bigger checks than I ever had. Not surprisingly, the purse strings never opened near me. Kevin and I won the tag team titles at Slamboree in Philadelphia in a tremendous match. It might have been even better than the one in Chicago. It was especially gratifying to have such a great crowd with the knowledge that my friend was in the crowd, as were longtime friends John McNulty and John Imbriani. Even Eric Bischoff noticed how excited I was about the bout, saying, "Now that's the Cactus Jack I want to see." A month later, we successfully defended our belts against Sags and Knobs. I had a 300-mile drive home before heading out early the next morning for another match in Philadelphia, this time in the cozy confines of the ECW arena. This match had a little controversy surrounding it and would lead to considerably more in the future. ECW was a small promotion based out of Philadelphia that prided itself on its rabid fans and hardcore wrestling style. Todd Gordon, who had been the financial backer for Joel Goodhart's TWA, was the owner and was a big fan of mine. Paul E. Dangerously, wrestling's mad scientist, was their booker and had, on a shoestring budget, put together the most exciting wrestling show on television. Kevin, who had worked for ECW before his return to WCW, was a close friend of Todd's, and he hoped to act as a liaison between the two companies. At that point, the two sides were even looking at the idea of doing talent exchanges. As it turned out, WCW worked its way around exchange by offering ECW talent big money and very nearly sucked it dry. The company today stays afloat due to a few loyal wrestlers and the creativity of Paul E. Using Kevin's help, Todd wanted to book a dream match between Cactus Jack and an ECW wrestler named Sabu. Sabu was fast becoming the biggest name on the independent circuit. As the nephew of the original Sheik, a 60s and 70s wrestling legend, Sabu had grown up wanting to be a star like his uncle. After years of setting up rings and paying his dues, he had finally caught on, first in Japan, where gory death matches had left his body zigzagged with thick bands of scars, and then in the States, where he had become Paul E's biggest star. Without uttering a single word, he had captured the ECW fans' imagination with his wide array of suicidal maneuvers. Todd felt that this match would be a gold mine. I did too, but I wanted it to be my gold mine. This was a match that promoters around the country were going to want to book, and I was going to give it to them, but only when the time was right. As long as I stayed under contract to WCW, the time wasn't right. I explained my feelings to everyone involved, but in the end, I was outvoted. This was an important match for both companies, and I had to go. I thought we had a hell of a match. I later saw a tape and still thought so. Unfortunately, expectations were so high for this match that they were impossible to live up to. There were people in that converted bingo hall who literally thought they were going to see someone die. When I finished the match, my lower back was in a great deal of pain. There was no shower in that little sweatbox arena, and my body started to break out in hives. I wanted nothing more than to have a hot shower and a clean bed, but remembering the importance of the match, I stuck around for 3 more hours until it was my time to do interviews. In them, I tried my best to put over ECW and Sabu and explain what it felt like to lose to a better man. To illustrate just how upset I was, I spit on the WCW tag team belt. I had no idea how much trouble my saliva would cause. By the time I left the arena, I could barely walk. I ate dinner with Shane Douglas, who is now an ECW mainstay, and a couple of the other guys, and then I walked back to the hotel next door with shuffling 6-inch steps. By 6 o'clock that morning, I had hives covering over half my body. I got up for a second shower and had trouble moving at all. I called a fan who brought me to the hospital. An emergency room can't do a whole lot for a back injury, but they diagnosed a strained muscle and sent me home. Now, I know the pain of a torn abdominal muscle had been surprising to me, but a strain? Come on. Who did they think they were dealing with? I had an MRI done on my lower back when I got to Atlanta. Back then, they needed to wait for a few days before getting the results. Nowadays, the results are almost instantaneous. In the interim, I actually started to feel better and I began wrestling again. The phone rang as I prepared to head to center stage for a match with Orndorff and Roma. Janie Engel was on the line and she asked me if I'd hold for Rick. Cactus, Rick began accusingly. Did you do an interview where you spit on the WCW tag team belt? Now, someone had told me that Gene Okerlund had stooged off my ECW interview to Flair after seeing it on the Sunshine Network in Florida, so I was prepared. Yeah, Rick, I did, I said excitedly. Did you see it? Flair seemed taken aback by my tone. Why would you do an interview where you spit on the championship belt? He inquired. Well, Rick, I explained to my boss with even more excitement in my voice. I wanted the fans to understand that as much as I valued that belt, I valued my pride a little more. By spitting on the belt, I felt that I was adding an exclamation point to that fact. I know how important this match was for WCW, so I wanted to give a little something extra. With that, Flair said he needed to take another call. I was all fired up. Fuck him, I silently mouthed while raising my finger in a stone-cold salute. When Flair got back on the line, he said he had to go, but that he'd talk to me at TV. It would be great to say that I went there and verbally tore Nate a new asshole, but the truth is, not wanting to create waves, I apologize for disrespecting the image of the belt. Flair was pleasant enough about the whole thing as I watched his 45-year-old man comb back his hair as he looked in the mirror as if he thought he was the Fonz. Hey! A nurse showed me my MRI results, which revealed 2 bulging discs and 1 herniated disc. If you think of the discs in your back as jelly donuts, a bulge occurs if the jelly has started to put pressure on the donut, causing it to bulge. And a herniation is when the jelly actually squirts out. Well, my jelly had actually squirted out. The nurse left and Dr. Rosen, the name had been changed to protect my bank account, walked in a few minutes later. He started in by saying, Well, Michael, looks like you've got 2 bulging discs. I kept waiting for him to continue, but he didn't. Finally, I continued his diagnosis for him. What about the herniated disc? I asked, which startled him. Oh, how did you know about that? My reply was simple. I read the report. He was clearly caught off guard and began backpedaling with his brain. Well, it is, but it isn't, came his somewhat less than scientific reply. That was all I needed to hear. I took my MRIs and sought a second opinion. Dr. Armstrong was the guy wrestlers went to when they didn't trust Rosen. Armstrong took one look at my MRIs and strongly advised me not to wrestle until I saw a back specialist. He said the MRI detected a portion of the disc that had fragmented and was floating freely in my spinal column. If this fragment lodged in the wrong area, it could be serious trouble. Unfortunately, I had to leave for Florida the next day and didn't have time to see a specialist. Dr. Armstrong wished me luck and sent me off with a note that read, Do not wrestle. To do so would risk serious and permanent injury, including but not limited to loss of control of bowel and bladder function, loss of sensation in extremities, and paralysis. Do not wrestle until seen by a specialist. I called WCW and told them the news, but told them that I would come to Florida anyway. When I got to the Residence Inn, Kevin called me to his room. What's going on here? He asked. They don't believe me, do they? I said sadly, knowing that my question was merely rhetorical. Of course they don't, Kevin shot back. Rick thinks you did this because he yelled at you about spitting on the belt. I was getting hot. Where is he? Went to a boardroom where Flair was sitting with several other wrestlers of the booking committee. Cactus, Flair said, the tone of his voice sounding like troll to me. Kevin tells me you won't be able to wrestle tomorrow. Is that true? Yes, Rick, it is, I answered. Are you sure? He shot back as if I were on trial. Yes, I am, Rick, I answered again. Now it hit a nerve. I pulled out Dr. Armstrong's note and with more than a little anger in my voice addressed the nature boy. I've got a legitimate medical note from a respected orthopedic surgeon that tells me I would be risking loss of bowel and bladder control and paralysis if I wrestle. I'm actually scared, Rick, and none of you seem to give a damn, and for once in my life I'm going to put myself and my family before this business. I am not going to wrestle. Is this true? He said to someone whose identity escapes me. Well, the unknown man said to Flair, the doctor did say he could use some time off. But what about tomorrow? Flair inquired. The doctor says that one more match shouldn't make a difference, the unknown man answered. Now it was my turn to step back in. I explained that it is, but it isn't diagnosis and stressed the second opinion. That's true, Rick, Unknown said, actually backing me up on this matter. A lot of the boys don't trust Rosen. They go to Dr. Armstrong. Look, I said, my note says don't wrestle until seeing a back specialist. If you can get me to a specialist who can give me a myelogram and a CAT scan, and if that doctor says I can wrestle, then I will. Away I went to the Sand Lake Regional Hospital. Unfortunately, the hospital was not able to give me those tests on short notice. The doctors echoed Dr. Armstrong's advice before I left. I should have listened, but I didn't. When I got back to the residence, I went to the boardroom, opened the door, and said, I'll wrestle, but I'm not doing anything risky. You see how soon they forget. I was on the floor stretching at the Orlando arena when a familiar, rough voice addressed me. I looked up and saw Harley. There was sadness in his eyes. Everything you've done for them, and this is how they repay you. I didn't say anything but nodded my head. If I'd spoken at all, I very well might have cried. Cactus, he continued, I hope you remember this night for a long time. You know something, Harley? I will. I sent Harley a Christmas card that year that said simply, I wish the office had done half as much for me as you have. 2 years later, his wife told me how much it had meant to him. I did wrestle that night, and I was scared as hell. It was the worst pay-per-view match that I have ever been in, and the fans know it. Now, I've been in some stinkers before, but I always had this feeling inside me that no matter how bad things sucked, I could always somehow pull it out of the gutter. I got that same feeling in Orlando that night as we clusterfucked to a symphony of silence. But I waited on the ring apron until the feeling went away. After 22 minutes of a match that was about 9 minutes too long, we dropped the tag team titles to Orndorff and Roma, just as they had so mysteriously predicted over 10 weeks earlier. Chapter 23. By this point, it was becoming clear that due to irreconcilable differences, the remaining months of the WCW Cactus Jack marriage weren't going to be happy ones. Gary Juster, a company attorney, told me that they would be willing to let me leave a month early with full pay on the condition that I came back at the September pay-per-view and wrestled Kevin Sullivan. That sat fine with me, and Juster said they'd work on the legal aspects. I still had one more controversy to handle, however. The phone rang, and I was dumb enough to answer it. I should have just sat at home and let the machine pick it up, or better yet, thrown both the phone and the machine into Lake Allatoona. But I didn't think quick enough. It was Janie Eagle, and she said that Flair had a big angle to turn me heel on Kevin, and he needed me at TV. I thought you guys were done with me, I said to Janie. I know, she replied, but baseball went on strike, and Turner's giving us more hours to fill, and Rick really needs you. Damn, I thought as I hung up the phone. I don't want to be a heel. It was early August, and since I had given my notice 3 months earlier, my phone had been ringing steadily with independent offers. I had already taken several opening dates with ECW and some other groups as well, and was booked on a 2-week tour of Austria. My weight was down to 280, and with my back pain reduced, it'll never be completely gone, I was really in a groove. For merchandising purposes, a must on the independent scene, it was vital that I be considered a good guy. But what could I do? The wheels of the heel turn were already in motion. I heard Flair's scenario, and it was exciting, except for the fact that it would cost me a fortune in potential independent merchandise revenue. I was dejected, and I asked veteran wrestler Rip Rogers, the cheapest man in wrestling, for his professional opinion. Despite the fact that Rip was a guy considered too weird even for this sport, I liked him and valued his opinion. Actually, I felt like Rip was probably the most talented guy in the business who never really made it, because his reputation preceded him and usually destroyed him. Once Barry Windham lost his keys when they dropped into the toilet and sank to the bottom of his cloudy brown Jack Daniels diarrhea concoction. Barry thought the keys were lost for good until Rip rolled up his sleeves and went to work. He emerged a moment later with the keys and a newfound disgust from the boys. Another time, two wrestlers jokingly suggested they were going to have some jailhouse romance with Rip. Go ahead, Rip said, pulling down his pants and spreading his cheeks. It was quite a sight to see Rip running backward down the hall, chasing the two wrestlers, his puckered starfish leading the charge. I really wish I could leave this place as a baby, I said before adding, this angle's going to change that. No, it won't, Rip shot back quickly and assuredly. You don't think leaving Kevin lying will turn me heel? I asked. Cack, Rip said laughing. Kevin Sullivan is the least sympathetic character in the business. The fans will love you for it. What about Dave? He's sympathetic, I countered, waiting to see what the ketchup soup drinker would come back with. Yeah, he is, Rip had to admit, but Cack, even the fans can tell he's just a mediocre worker. It was true. Dave Sullivan was one of the nicest guys in the business. So nice, in fact, that the boys would always mention what a hell of a guy he was before they mentioned what an abysmal worker he was. Sure enough, Rip's words came to fruition. When I dropped Kevin, the cheers were deafening. When I dropped Dave, they intensified further. By the time I finished giving my interview, I was as big a babyface as I'd ever been. I guess I'd be selling t-shirts and 8x10 glossies after all. Later that night, Kevin called me at home. I bolted out when Kevin was receiving medical attention and was already on the West Peachtree Street when the night air blowing through my good guy hair by the time he got to the dressing room. Brother, said Kevin, you were the babyface out there tonight. I know, I said to Kevin compassionately, but who would have ever thought it? A month later, I called Kevin from Austria the day before our pay-per-view match in Roanoke, Virginia. I told him where I was and that I'd be cutting it real close with my flight schedule. Don't worry, though, I assured him. I'll be there. I left town in Austria, whose name escapes me right now, and drove 3 hours to Vienna. From Vienna, I caught a flight to Frankfurt, and after a 3-hour layover, continued on to Atlanta. In Atlanta, I ran to barely meet my connecting flight to Roanoke, and once in Roanoke, hailed a cab to the Civic Center. Pay-per-views usually require the talent to be at the building 6 months before bell time. I got there 15 minutes before the first match went on. Kevin and I were second. Brother, relieved Kevin said with a sigh, we were panicking. My final WCW match was billed as a loser leaves WCW match. Because I already had 3 months of independent dates booked, the outcome was in about as much doubt as that night I showed up at the Sportatorium in Dallas with everything I owned stuffed into my '80 Plymouth Arrow. Give me a slam off the second turnbuckle to the floor, was all I said as I rushed to the dressing room. As my Michael Hayes pen entrance music, Mr. Bang Bang, began, Kevin called out to me, "Brother, do I stand on the door floor or the apron when I throw you?" I looked at the 5 foot 7 inch former games master, and before stepping through the curtain for my final WCW match ever, answered his question. "Kevin, if you stand on the floor, you'll never reach me." With no preparation and with 23 hours of traveling behind me, I charged into Kevin. Guess what? We had a pretty good match. Anyone with an appreciation for spontaneity and give and take brawling would have enjoyed it especially. WCW had certain rules pertaining to violence, but we ignored those right off the bat. I mean, what were they going to do? Fire me? The announcers were still trying to portray me as the bad guy, but the fans cheered me harder than ever. As for Kevin, well, the writing was on the wall, and out of necessity, he turned on poor Evad about a week later, leading to some of the worst matches of all time. Kevin later had a run on top with Hogan and others, and as the man who replaced Flair as Booker, was largely responsible for helping the company climb out of its creative hole. Yeah, I lost the match. Looking at the fans, I made the decision to run to the crowd where I was mauled by hundreds of well-wishers, some of whom were genuinely moved. WCW could have shown this special moment, but they cut instead to a sterile, pre-taped backstage interview. The thought hit me to disrobe gradually until all my wrestling attire was thrown to the fans, but thankfully common sense prevailed. After all, I would much rather be known as the guy who gave it his all instead of the guy whose ass looked like a piece of Swiss cheese that had been backed into a belt sander. I was in the shower, cleansing not only my body but 3 years of memories when Bischoff approached me. He thanked me for my effort and told me if I behaved myself, I'd be welcome to come back at a later time. He hugged me, and while the hot water produced its steamy fog around us, we held each other for a long, long time. Come on, you didn't really buy that, did you? No, there was no shower, no steam, no hug, and no holding for a long, long time. Actually, he caught up to me as I was walking out the door. He did thank me, but did tell me I could come back, and then shook my hand. I then walked out into the cool autumn breeze, a free man. Chapter 24. I had walked into WCW in August 1991 with about $2,000 in the bank and a baby on the way. I left 3 years later with a house, a car, 2 children, and some solid financial investments that I could build on. I never truly made big money in WCW. Under $56,000 might seem like a lot, but after taxes and road expenses, it's not exactly the type of income that sets you up for life after 3 years. Still, without WCW, Cactus Jack would be a distant memory and mankind would have never existed. The coverage I received with WCW made it possible for me to go out on my own and continue to make a decent living. There are a couple of last things I'd like to get off my chest before I slam the door shut on this part of my career. The first centers around a comment I made about Eric Bischoff shortly after leaving, and the second looks at a lawsuit I filed against the company for the loss of my ear. Soon after my departure from WCW, I did an interview with an industry newsletter or dirt sheet called the Pro Wrestling Torch. The Torch would always get a hold of wrestlers after they left the big companies and get them to vent their spleen. As a result, there on the pages of the Torch, guys would bury their careers and burn their bridges by insulting and hurting the feelings of their fellow wrestlers and former bosses. I was no different. When asked if I had ever been asked to tone down my ring style, I answered, all the time. One night in Chicago, Eric Bischoff was literally pleading with me not to do anything extreme. Now, I know Bischoff read this, and I know that since he was a martial arts tough guy, it had to have hurt. It's not his fault he has perfect cheekbones. In retrospect, the word pleading may have been an exaggeration. In truth, Bish was legitimately concerned about my health, and having known my family personally, was asking me to tone it down. There you have it, an intimate confession. It is my hope that Eric Bischoff can hate me for the right reasons, such as because I'm a guy he let walk away who is now a major reason he wakes up with boot marks all over his butt cheeks every Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning refers to the Monday Night Wrestling Nielsen ratings, which aren't available until the next day. So with the truth now known, I would just like to ask for forgiveness. Please, I'm pleading with you. There have been several people who felt I was hypocritical in filing a lawsuit against WCW for the loss of my ear, while at the same time allowing that same lost ear to be exploited by the World Wrestling Federation. Let me address this. First, understand I was not filing a ridiculous suit for millions of dollars based on pain and suffering, mental duress, and lots of other mumbo-jumbo. I filed a suit for the exact amount of money that it would cost to have reconstructive surgery done, approximately $42,000, and 6 months' salary at my old rate of $3,000 a week, the time it would take to heal. This was the same agreement that I had with WCW before I naively agreed to return to the ring. I explained all of this to my attorney in addition to giving him a rundown of all the sacrifices I had made on behalf of the company. I also explained the outrageous salaries that were now being paid to WCW wrestlers who had never even headlined a card. He agreed that this was unfortunate but not applicable, and that our only recourse was to sue for negligence. Now, I've been banged up pretty good over the last 15 years, and the last thing I want to do is point fingers and blame other people for the career choices and ring risks that I have willingly taken. But I felt I was in the right, even if negligence was not the road I wanted to take. As it turned out, I never got a dime because of a Georgia law that forbids an employee from suing an employer. But the point I want to make is this. I sued for negligence because there is no law in our legal system that prevents a company from paying Johnny B. Bad twice as much money as they pay Cactus Jack. Maybe not, but by God, there ought to be. Yes, indeed, I was a free man, free to choose when, where, why, how long, how many times, and with whom I wrestled. Forget the fact that I'd have no more guaranteed income. The important thing is I was free. The independent circuit is a difficult one. Making your own bookings, cutting your own deals, and hoping that some of the less reputable promoters won't bail out on a show are only a few of the hassles involved. Working the indies also requires receiving money up front so as to guarantee you won't get screwed. Even with a 50% deposit, the screwing sometimes occurred anyway. One time I was booked in the westernmost part of West Virginia on a Sunday afternoon. I drove all night from eastern Pennsylvania to arrive on time. I checked into a hotel and called home. Good, Kalev shouted into the receiver. I'm glad I caught you in time. The promoter called this morning and said that the show is canceled. When I informed Colette that I'd just driven 10 hours, she wasn't so glad after all. I swore to the promoter, who called himself Mad Dog something or other, that I would do whatever I had to do to ensure that he would never be successful in the business. So, Mad Dog, if you read this, it's not too late to send me my money, you prick. Even when I was earning top dollar by industry standards, it was tough row to hoe on the independent scene. Due to my exposure on Turner's nationally televised shows, and with the reputation I had received as a damn hard-working wrestler, I was able to demand top dollar for the shows. $500 for a weekday or a smaller show, $750 for a larger one. If promoters booked me on several shows, I would cut deals with them. I realized that the chances of making what I had with WCW were next to impossible. But man, I was going to try. It wasn't long before I was questioning my decision to leave the company. Colette, for her part, had never really stopped questioning the decision. I was determined to prove her wrong, so on a hot night in late September, I set out for the prestigious confines of the Alpharetta Auction Barn. The barn was only a 40-minute drive from my house, so I was willing to accept a smaller fee of $200 for the night. That was all right, though, because I had picked up plenty of Cactus Jack t-shirts that I bought for a song from the WCW Liquidator, and plenty of glossy 8x10s to make up for the smaller payoffs. I brought along my sister-in-law Gail as well to help keep up with what would surely be an insatiable demand. As we headed for Alpharetta, I could visualize the entire scene. I could literally see it as it played out in my head. There would be a line out the door filled with people holding intricately detailed and lovingly created Cactus Jack signs. I could even foresee a couple of unscrupulous scalpers forcing small children to shell out big money to see their hero inside the auction barn. When I pulled into what would generally be described as a shithole, I guessed that the scalpers had decided to stay home. Upon further review, I realized that there was not a real great proliferation of signs or fans to wield them for that matter. The place was practically empty. I had flashbacks of Polka High School all over again. I walked into the oversized closet they called a dressing room and detected the classic combination of urine and stale beer. I turned to see if Jake had somehow been booked on this same small show. What I saw instead was a group of hungry wrestlers looking at me with reverence in their eyes. See what happens, began one with a strong North Georgia accent, but not the slightest hint of sarcasm in his voice. You bring in Cactus Jack and we double the house. It was true. My star status and international recognition had brought the crowd at the auction barn from 28 to 57. Apparently there were some people who wanted to watch my goddamn trampoline act after all. I headed out to the gimmick table anyway, where Gail was waiting for my assortment of 8x10s and my Bang Bang t-shirts. The crowd may be small, I told Gail, but I bet every one of these fans is going to want something to bring home with them. I was wrong. After 10 minutes and a total gross of $12, I started thinking of a line from an old Ricky Nelson song. I sang a song about a honky-tonk. It was time to leave. It's important not to overstay your welcome when working the gimmick table. Some guys want to work the table until bell time, hoping for that one last dollar, but the idea for me is to stay only as long as there's a line. Well, there was no line, so I actually started contradicting my own advice. I was looking for that last dollar. After a few minutes, I decided to pack it in and left with about a half a thimble full of dignity. I entered the ring for the night's final match to a smattering of applause and one guy yelling, "You suck, Cactus Jack! You suck!" I was sporting a piece of white athletic tape on my head, which covered a small wound I had suffered 2 days earlier in a match with my old partner Abdullah the Butcher. Abby had accidentally punctured my forehead with one of his foreign objects, and as a result I had a small but deep hole in my head. I made up my mind to leave Alpharetta and its auction barn without getting hurt. Like many independent rings, this one was a piece of garbage and offered a variety of ways to get hurt. Blown knees and ankles were a common consequence of working in a bad ring. I locked up with my opponent and grabbed him in a headlock. As I held him there, taking the chance to show off my 17-inch pythons, I felt a drip on my forehead. Then another one. Drip, drip, drip. Now it was faster. I looked down at my arm and saw a growing family of blood drops nestled into the hairy area of my forearms. I must have grazed my head as I locked up, and now, in front of 57 fans and my wife's sister, I was busted wide open. There goes my little wrestling match, I thought as I felt the flood of dark red liquid that was now cascading down my head. I let my opponent go and threw him outside. I then went to work on him out there and encouraged him to do the same to me in the hope that it would look to the fans as if the injury had come up from some type of brawling maneuver instead of from a harmless lockup. I picked up a garbage can and hit him with it. You could see the indentation where the devastating Rubbermaid had made contact with human skull. I then picked it up and brought the dark gray container down over his head so he was trapped in there. Now, I had been the victim of more trash cans over the head than anybody and knew just what to do. Stagger around in a large circle while your foe prepares himself for the big punch, clothesline, drop kick, etc. I'd even lain prone in the ring one time in WCW with my upper body and head entombed in the Rubbermaid while Sting splashed me from the top rope. The entire concept is foolproof. There's just an innate desire in people's hearts to see grown men stagger around in circles while wearing a garbage can. It's been that way since well before biblical terms, although I'm not sure that it was ever documented. This guy had his own theory, however. The can hadn't been on him for more than a second when he threw it off, straight into the air. The force of the can paled in comparison, however, next to the force of his projectile vomiting, which continued without interruption for about 30 seconds. Looked down at my Cactus Jack boots, which revealed some new spots that didn't quite fit into the leopard skin motif. I could hear Ricky Nelson's voice singing just a little louder. It was time to leave. I drove home with some serious doubts about my future. Gail was talking, but I remained more or less silent. Bleeding is a pretty intimate experience, and it was not one that I cared to share with my sister-in-law at that moment. I walked into my home, took a Bates Motel shower, and went to bed with visions of scalpers and lines out the door dancing in my head. Chapter 25. I made my return to the ECW arena at the end of September. I had no belt to spit on this time, so I assumed would avoid any further controversy. I had already agreed with Todd and Paul E. to make ECW my top priority. At that time, the company was booking only 4 shows a month, and I agreed to appear in all of them. I was excited about the show because it was to be my first singles match ever with the Funker, Terry Funk, the same guy who 4 years earlier jokingly claimed not to have seen shit in me. I'd been a friend of Terry for years, and he was pretty much my hero in the business. He had seen it all and done it all, but he still had the decency to respect all the other wrestlers, and he never failed to be polite to the fans. When the bell rang, however, Terry was a different man. He would become a wild-eyed madman at every show, no matter how small the crowd. He could be that out-of-control madman one moment, and then kindly old Uncle Terry the next. Even at the age of 50, he took a tremendous beating, and even years later, at 54, took a World Wrestling Federation beating from me so bad that I apologized to him for days about it. Cactus now, don't give me that shit, he'd say in his soft-spoken mumble whisper. That's part of the business, and I was glad I could do it for you. Terry was the king of storytellers, and I always listened closely for bits of information I could use. You had to listen closely when the Funker talked, he spoke so damn softly. One time, on a propeller plane flight, I sat across the aisle while he talked for 2 hours. I nodded and laughed the whole time, not wanting to tell the Funker that I couldn't hear a word he said. On this evening in Philadelphia, he had offered some especially prophetic advice. Cactus, just remember, every match is a great match until it begins. In addition to the stories Terry told, I love to hear stories that were about Terry. One of them occurred in Knoxville, where Terry was in town to defend the NWA Heavyweight Championship in the mid-70s. In those days, the world champion would defend his belt against all the regional champions. On this occasion, Terry was being interviewed by a newscaster who was grilling Terry about what she called the pageantry involved in wrestling. This was during an era when wrestlers didn't consider themselves entertainers, and the world championship was meant to be taken very seriously. You wrestlers really crack me up, the reporter said, looking down somewhat on this simple wrestler, with all the pageantry and such. Terry laughed and started to speak. For a guy who whispered and mumbled, he was actually one of the best interviews in the business. What if I came to the ring and a band was playing? Terry said with a laugh. What if there were girls in short skirts who danced when I got into the ring? And then, by golly, some cannons would go off. Wouldn't that be great? The reporter agreed. This had affirmed her opinion of pageantry in wrestling, but the Funker wasn't through. I've just described exactly what happens every time the Dallas Cowboys score a touchdown. Another Funk victory. One of my favorite Funk interviews, and one that the World Wrestling Federation wrestlers still imitate today, was also one of his worst. So bad that it was good, or maybe it was just good and no one realized it. Terry was working for Jim Cornette's Smoky Mountain Wrestling promotion in 1994 and was preparing for a match with Bullet Bob Armstrong. Armstrong was a Southern wrestling legend and patriarch of the Armstrong family, which included current World Wrestling Federation star Road Dogg. Even today, at 55, Bob will walk into the small gym my wife and I own in the Florida Panhandle sporting an impressive pair of guns. In this interview, Funk was deliberating on how he could anger a Southeasterner like Armstrong into finding the guts to fight him. I know, Funk began in a very slow, deliberate tone. Barb Armstrong is a son of a bitch. No, that won't answer a Southeasterner because they have no self-respect. I know, how about this? All of your sons are bastards. There, that ought to do it. No, because no Southeasterner really cares about his kids. I know. Your wife is a whore. Yeah, that's it. No, no, no. Southeasterners don't really care about their wives either. Wait, wait, I've got it. The one thing that would make a gutless son of a bitch like Bob Armstrong mad enough to fight? Here it is. Your mistress is a whore. The fans were, as in most cases at the ECW arena, extremely excited about the evening's show. Now, I use the term arena lightly, as it more closely resembled a larger auction barn. In actuality, when I started with ECW, we often had to clear the building in time for midnight bingo. I could almost accurately describe the ambience as a Rocky Horror Picture Show for wrestling. There was a dollar store next door to the arena, and they did a brisk pre-show business on pots and pans and various other culinary utensils. The fans would then bring their purchases to the arena, where they would generously hand them to their favorite wrestlers. I became so used to swinging these cheap aluminum objects that one time I grabbed one and was in mid-swing by the time I realized I had a cast iron skillet in my possession. Approximately 2 weeks later, the recipient of the skillet blow, the Sandman, was able to wrestle again. I'm often asked what the strangest foreign object I ever used was. No doubt about it, the two-man kayak that was once handed to me at the arena tops the list. Or maybe the Leonard Cohen album I used on Mikey Whipwreck. Terry and I were scheduled to be on last. Like most ECW shows, we would have to try to follow a lot of strange and exciting action. By the time we got out there, we knew the fans would have seen a variety of chair shots, pan shots, stop sign shots, in-crowd brawling, out-of-the-ring dives, and obscenity-laced ring interviews. It wouldn't be easy, and in retrospect, main eventing in ECW never was. Keeping in mind Funk's history, every match is a great match until it begins. I grabbed the mic. Terry, I called him my Cactus Jack Warble, it's going to hurt me to kick your ass all over the ECW arena, but not as bad as it's going to hurt you. I handed Terry the mic. He smiled that lovable old Uncle Terry smile and said, That's what I've always loved about you, Cactus. You've always been a dreamer. Terry and I then shook hands and tore into each other. As two veteran hardcore warriors, the Funker and I didn't have to rely on cheap violent stunts to get a pop out of the crowd. We knew how to work. No, we didn't have to rely on it, but we did anyway, giving the crowd the same variety of chair shots, pan shots, stop sign shots, and out of the ring brawling that they had already been seen for the past 3 hours. We did throw in one added bonus, however. It was actually a combination of two moves we discussed earlier, but paired together for maximum audience enjoyment. A hangman complemented by a busted eyebrow. Terry threw me to the ropes, and I caught my head and neck in a perfect textbook form, even if I doubt the existence of such a textbook. My legs were kicking, but my head was in perfect position. I looked up with my right eye and saw Terry throwing that big left. Bam! His fist went off like a rifle against my eyebrow bone. The blow helped knock me out of the ropes, and I lay on the cold concrete floor. No protective mats at ECW. Relishing that rare feeling of pain and satisfaction, we had the fans rocking and rolling when a tag team called the Public Enemy hit the ring. Seeing that the PE had pooped in our party, Terry and I banded together to fight them off. After a minute, they went down, and Terry told me to get him a chair. There were no more within easy reach, so I called a fan to throw me his. He willingly obliged, and a chair sailed into the ring. Then another flew in. Then another, and another, and another. It was literally raining chairs as the plastic seating devices were coming from all angles. In all my years, it was the damnedest thing I'd ever seen. I stood there in wonderment at this spectacle until one of the chairs bounced off my head and I realized it was time to leave. In a scene that would be replayed weekly on ECW television for years, the ring had been bombarded with over 200 chairs, with the Public Enemy literally buried underneath. When they emerged from under the sea of hard plastic, we had next month's main event already booked. Funk and Cactus would be taking on the Public Enemy. The backstage area of the bingo hall often more closely resembled a triage unit at a hospital. So many guys were trying so hard to impress this unique audience that injuries were inevitable. Guys were practically killing themselves to earn the fans' approval, and the fans in ECW could often be callous about these ring mishaps. JT Smith was a perfect example of an ECW guy who would do anything to get over. I had met him 4 years earlier, and he had unfortunately taken me on as his role model. He would do Cactus Jack moves, but he didn't have the Cactus Jack ability to absorb them, and as a result, he spent a lot of his time either injured or in agony. On one memorable night, JT attempted a springboard dive off the ropes to the floor and slipped, sending him crashing head first to the concrete below. As he lay unconscious, the crowd broke into a chant they used whenever someone visibly messed up a move. You fucked up! You fucked up! Over the course of time, incidents like these would weigh very heavily on my mind. Ironically, J.T. Smith, the guy who spent years searching for acceptance, finally found it in ECW as a comedy act. As a black man portraying an old-world Italian, J.T. would talk like a paisano and would screw up moves on purpose, and the fans loved him for it. You fucked up! You fucked up! Became a chant of affection. I worked a string of independent shows for anyone who met my price before returning to the ECW arena 3 weeks later for the big match with Public Enemy. I worked hard on all these shows, but I'd be less than honest with you if I didn't admit that my main purpose was to sell as many Cactus Jack pictures, shirts, and assorted paraphernalia as I could. In addition to purchasing Cactus Jack shirts through a liquidator, I also bought a host of kids' belts and foam fingers that I hawked shamelessly through these shows. The ECW arena was different, however. If I sold pictures at all, it would only be for a few minutes, as it was important for me to retain my aura in that atmosphere. An aura could be ruined in a hurry if these ruthless fans caught you saying, "Please buy my picture." Within a month, however, I would unveil a new shirt that would both make me a hell of a lot of money and revolutionize the way ECW looked at merchandising. The Wanted Dead t-shirt, a black shirt with a weathered yellow Old West style wanted poster on it, was so nice that it blew away anything else for sale. For a while, the ECW arena looked like the future Austin 316 craze with a sea of black and yellow to meet me. Unlike the Austin phenomenon, however, the Wanted craze was limited to 1,000 fans at the ECW arena and not millions worldwide. Paul E. took note of this small-scale success, however, and went to work. Today, ECW merchandise is a huge seller nationwide. When I got to my hotel, I was alerted by Todd Gordon that Terry had missed his flight and wouldn't be making it to the show. Actually, due to reasons of his own, Terry would not set foot in an ECW ring for another 6 months, paving the road to our future feud overseas. Todd was beside himself. This was a huge match, and the rabid fans at the arena would be hard to appease without it. "What do we do?" I asked Todd. "Could we use a substitute?" "It'll never work," Todd stated dismally. "The only guy the fans wouldn't shit on is Big Al," referring to a huge wrestler whose chokeslam had made him a cult favorite in the arena. Al chokeslammed everybody. Santa Claus, midgets, 2 wrestlers at once, women, even the guy playing the national anthem. Aside from that one move, however, Al didn't do a whole lot well. I thought about the situation for a minute before asking, "What about Mikey?" The real-life John Watson was a smallish 19-year-old kid who grew up idolizing Cactus Jack and didn't look like he had an athletic bone in his body. He was trained by a guy named Sonny Blaze, whom I myself had trained in Mark Tindler's garage. John was so unimpressive that Sonny refused to charge him money to train him out of guilt, because he assumed the poor kid would never make it. John began setting up the ring at the ECW arena and was spotted performing moonsaults and various other high-flying maneuvers inside the empty building. Paulie saw this unassuming kid, and somewhere in his mind, Mikey Whipwreck was born. Paul cast Mikey as the ultimate loser, a gimmick that had been a cult hit for his Jim Ignatowski-like wrestling school dropout several years earlier. The difference was Mikey had talent. Paul began booking him against the top guys in the company, and every week he'd take a world-class ass-kicking. Dressed in sweatpants and with shorts over them and a long-sleeved dragon-printed shirt and looking all of about 11 years old, Mikey didn't exactly send shivers down spines. Throw in a hometown of Buffalo and the theme music of the Beck song Loser, and you've got a pretty good idea of what was going on. It was months before Mikey even got an offensive move. When he did, it was major news. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" announcer Joey Styles yelled. "His first offensive move!" So without any offense, Mikey got beat up. A lot. But he was so good at it that fans actually started taking notice. The ECW fans may have been heartless, but they could recognize good wrestling. Soon Mikey was a cult favorite. One night, several months before my ECW arrival, Mikey won the ECW television title on a flute, and the place went ballistic. As a champion, Mikey was finally given a chance to talk. Unlike traditional wrestlers, Mikey didn't exude confidence while talking. On the contrary, he was terrified. He'd get on the microphone in an attempt to hand the belt back. He claimed that his mother didn't want him to wrestle. He'd start to say, "Let me tell you something, Pitbull number 1," before thinking about it and crying, "I'm gonna get killed." Then for several weeks straight, Mikey would wrestle, get destroyed, but somehow win by fluke. The guy was winning title matches without getting in a single offensive maneuver. By the time he lost the title, he had been on the receiving end of some brutal beatings, but was also the recipient of tremendous applause. Without Funk, we knew we needed a gimmick, and I felt that Mikey was it. I went to the ring alone to the sounds of Steppenwolf's Born to be Wild. The fans were aware that Funk was not in attendance, but no substitute had been named. When Public Enemy hit the ring, I grabbed the house mic and said I would be returning shortly with my partner. Joey Styles called the action as I disappeared behind the curtain. "Who is Cactus Jack going to find? What tough guy? What tremendous athlete? What former world champion will he return with? It's Mikey! Oh my God, it's Mikey!" I came through the curtain dragging Mikey by the arm as he desperately tried to get away. He looked like a child who didn't want to sit on Santa's lap or an adult who is forced to watch an Al Snow match. I started in with the PE, and Mikey promptly ran away to the back, leaving poor Cactus Jack defenseless against the ECW Tag Team Champions. After a few minutes of this beating, when all looked lost, Mikey re-emerged, and in true ECW fashion, he had a foreign object. But it wasn't a chair or any other normal instrument of destruction, because that wouldn't be Mikey-like. Instead, he held a flimsy piece of paneling that looked about as threatening as a gaggle of baby geese. Flimsy or not, the paneling made a hell of a noise upon impact, and he took turns bringing it down on the heads of the PE. When the paneling broke, Mikey Whipwreck, the man of no offense, began throwing lefts and rights to the jaws of both men. The roar of the crowd rose with each blow until he was laid out with a vicious double-team move. As he lay unmoving, Grunge and Flyboy Rocco Rock, PE members, began the attack on me. As we went over the railing, I noticed Mikey still lying there motionless. Now we were in the crowd and still no Mikey. For 5 minutes I took abuse while Mikey lay motionless inside the ring. Finally we returned and Rocco went to the top rope for what would surely be the coup de grace. As the flyboy stood perched atop the ropes, I got up and stumbled, falling into the rope, sending the flyboy testicles first into the turnbuckle below. He screamed on impact, fell into the ring, and tripped over Mikey, who still hadn't budged. With Rocco prone and holding his testes for comfort, Mikey found the strength to drape an arm over him. I stopped Grunge from interfering, and the referee made the historic count. 1, 2, 3, and ECW had new tag team champions. There was a whole tour of Japanese wrestling fans sitting ringside at the show, and when I saw them, I hopped the rail and celebrated as the Japanese media flashed away. I had no idea then just how much I'd see the Japanese fans and their presence in the future. Victor Criones and was a longtime promoter from Puerto Rico who was booking talent for a small blood and guts group in Japan called IWA. I received a call from him about coming to Japan and competing in their death matches that featured barbed wire and a variety of other torturous devices. I told him that I'd pass. At that time, I was having fun in ECW and was being booked around the country, and I had no desire to have my body torn to shreds. I really had no idea just how shredded I would become. Chapter 26. I had a weekend of matches for ECW in November and decided to bring Dewey along with me. He was 2.5 years old, and I figured it would be a great bonding time for father and son. He enjoyed the trip and even rolled around the ring a little when we got to the small arena in Hamburg, Pennsylvania that the World Wrestling Federation had used to tape television in before it went big time. I bailed out of the ring to do a telephone interview, during which I told the interviewer that the two most important philosophies in life were simple ones learned in childhood. He who smelt it dealt it, and bang bang you're dead. Actually, I find the whole he who smells it theory to be full of holes, as is its counterpart, he who denied it supplied it. In reality, especially in wrestling dressing rooms, the dealer of a gaseous submission is more likely to exit the room and leave others to enjoy it or else laugh with pride, thereby shooting the denial theory to pieces. I was booked in Hamburg with Sabu. The two of us had become a hot ticket around the country, and I certainly was earning my money. We'd engaged in more than a few classic battles, including one at the Silver Nugget in Las Vegas that included a foray into the casino area. I pile drove Sabu onto the blackjack table, sending gamblers scurrying and chips flying. Looking back at it, however, it may not have been the wisest decision in the world. If we had been in a bigger casino with more money at stake, there is the possibility we would have been physically punished for our action. I put myself up mentally for a long time in Hamburg. Dewey was fast asleep in the dressing room on a mattress made out of ring robes and turnbuckle pads. Sabu's music was playing when I heard a faint sound. My son had awakened, and he didn't seem pacified by the shaved heads and wild outfits all around him. He started to cry, softly at first, but with progressively more volume until it escalated into a full-blown tantrum. This can't be happening, I said out loud as I could feel my entire hour of mental preparation sailing away. I tried to comfort the little guy, but he was beside himself, and I could hear Born to Be Wild booming from the loudspeakers. I had to go. I kissed my son goodbye, placed him in the arms of the towering wrestler named 911, and sadly walked out the door. I was not prepared for Sabu, but I knew that many fans would drive hundreds of miles for a Sabu Cactus showdown. I was always determined not to let them down, and I tried my best to make this match a great one, even with the extenuating circumstances involved. I didn't mention those circumstances to Sabu for some reason. I think the homicidal suicidal maniac, as he was known, would be all that sensitive to my paternal problems. Instead, we went at it full tilt. I knocked the Indian madman to the ropes and picked up a wooden ringside chair to crown him with. Sabu moved, and the force of my swing ricocheted off the middle rope and propelled the chair backward into my own waiting head. I stumbled in my old faithful 360-degree angle, or the Watsusi, as some call it, while Sabu stepped to the second rope on the outside ring. He was ready to attempt a moonsault, and under perfect conditions would make chest-to-chest contact. Not too difficult, except for the fact that his body would be upside down and in midair when the desired contact would be made. In this case, however, our chests never connected. Nothing did. I reached my hands up in vain to try to intercept him, at his 210-pound missile flew high overhead. Now, in 15 years of wrestling, I've heard plenty of sickening sounds, many of them from my own body, but this was among the worst. Sabu's body impaled itself on the steel guardrail, and I grimaced as I heard the 1-2 combination of ribs breaking on steel and guttural animal-like screams welling up from deep inside Sabu's lungs. The crowd sensed in an instant that something was wrong, and actually cleared out of the way to allow him to breathe. I stalled for time, but returned shortly to see if he could go on. Give me time, he yelled, and I commenced throwing chairs into the ring and using whatever else was available to allow him some recuperation time. When I came back, he was still gasping for air, but was struggling bravely to get to his feet. He then continued and actually had a hell of a match. We fought down to the aisle to the dressing room, and before heading back to the ring, I reached into a garbage can and pulled out an empty Coors Light bottle. Use this, I said. To do what? Came the reply. To hit me with, I insisted. I crawled into the ring, again using the dependable Watusi, as I waited for the crashing sound of glass and the oohs and ahs from the Hamburg crowd that would lead to the end of the match. Well, I got the oohs and ahs, but not the crashing sound I was anticipating. Instead, there was a loud thunk as the glass bottle literally bounced off my head and spun clumsily on the canvas. In my beer bottle battered haze, I looked at the spinning cores container and thought back fondly to spin the bottle on our sixth grade camping trip and how excited I was with the bottle pointed to Sue Cirisano. The memory of Sue running for the door instead of honoring the strict and time-honored tradition of giving me a good one on the smacker finally brought me back to my senses, and I said the only words I could think of. Hit me again. Again the bottle came down, and again it thunked off my skull. Again, I said. Another thunk. But this time even the bloodthirsty ECW fans were starting to feel a little bad about this whole scenario, but damn it, we had a match to finish, and I wasn't about to do the job for a bottle. One more swing and one more thunk. Then another swing, and finally the satisfaction of shattering glass showering around me. Went to the dressing room where my recovered son was waiting with a 2.5-year-old hug that only a father can truly appreciate. Did you win, Daddy? He asked innocently. No, buddy, but it was a good match anyway. Would you like to see Grandma and Grandpa now? So with 5 lumps on my head and glass in my hair, we hopped into the rented Lumina and off to grandmother's house we went. It was during this time that I began working for Jim Cornette's Smoky Mountain promotion. Without a doubt, Corny had more energy than anyone I've ever met. Even while working as a manager in the World Wrestling Federation, he somehow found the time to book and star in his own promotion. Smokey and ECW were like night and day. Instead of hardcore bloodthirsty fans, Smokey had old-time fans. These were fans who still believed in good guys and bad guys, and to whom cheating was still reason to become upset. As Cactus Jack, I was instantly embraced as a fan favorite, but more importantly, as a guy whose shirts they wanted to buy. I was embroiled in a feud with Chris Candido that was actually a lot of fun, and I was making money courtesy of the generous fans of Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Corny gave me free reign over my interviews, which for some reason were laced with double entendres and bad poetry. During one promo, I compared my quest to free the simple-minded Boo Bradley from the evil clutches of Chris Candido to that of a missionary. I then stated I was going to really enjoy the missionary position. The feud with Candido also inspired these thoughtful verses. Candido, oh Candido, I'll beat you up, I'll make you bleedo. Like Rocky and Apollo Credo, oh Candido. I'll scare you stiff, oh yes indeedo. You'll leave a skid inside your Speedo, oh Candido. Pretty serious stuff. I was able to work quite a few shows for Cornette, highlighted by the traditional Thanksgiving and Christmas shows, but I was most happy to be able to spend some time with my old friend Brian Hildebrand. While I had been busy traveling up and down the roads for the past several years, Brian had been stuck on the independent circuit. While guys without an ounce of his talent had made it big, Brian had continued managing at whatever shows he could find and would even wrestle as a Ninja Turtle or some other creation that was geared to the kids. When Corny opened up the territory, Brian was among the first guys he called, and when I got there, he was firmly entrenched as not only a referee, but the head of merchandise and a dozen other jobs as well. This place would shut down if it weren't for Gerbil, was a common comment from veteran grappler Tracy Smothers, referring to Brian's new nickname. When Smokey began an interpromotional feud with the USWA, Brian had been gotten a chance to wrestle, and as a vicious heel referee turned wrestler, was finally able to truly showcase his talents. I feel bad for any wrestler who never gets his big shot, but my heart had gone out for years to Brian because he was so damn good and no one seemed to notice. I was genuinely glad for him that by the time I got to Smokey, his skills had been recognized. During my time in the arena, I met his lovely wife Pam and had the pleasure of watching more wrestling, eating more pasta, and seeing more mountain views than at any other time of my life. I saw Brian a few days ago at the Brian Pillman show. Even at 98 pounds, due to a long battle with stomach cancer, he had the determination to referee 2 matches, and he even looked good doing it. I was also able to read him much of this book, or some of it. It was gratifying to see how much he enjoyed it. He later told me the story of the gay beach in Fort Lauderdale had caused him to laugh harder than he had in months. Hang in there, Brian. You're a credit not only to this business, but to the better angels of our nature. Editor's note, Brian passed away after the writing of this book on September 8th, 1999. In late November, I received word that Terry Funk had signed a contract to wrestle for the IWA in Japan. I picked up the phone and called Victor Quinones. It was the only time in my 18 months as an independent that I asked for work. I was booked to leave on New Year's Eve for a 10-day tour. My body would never be quite the same. I flew to Tokyo in style. Seat 38E was far enough away from the movie screen as to make viewing difficult, but close enough to both the toilet and the smoking section to ensure a pleasant sensory experience. Northwest Airlines' cold soba noodle breakfast is an especially disagreeable one, and when we landed, I was exhausted, sick to my stomach, and smelled like a 290-pound cigarette. Tracy Smothers was on the flight as well, and we were met at the airport by one of the young boys, as the beginning Japanese wrestlers were commonly referred to. I waited at baggage claim for my 2 travel bags and my 12 dozen wanted shirts to arrive. Before my trip, my old partner Kevin Sullivan had spoken to me and advised me to take shirts to sell. I figured it would be a lot harder for the promotion to say no once I was there, so I never called for permission. As it turned out, I made more money in Japan as a seller of t-shirts than I did as the king of the deathmatch. Tajiri, the young boy who met us, spoke very little English. Apparently his Japanese left something to be desired as well, as the cab dropped us off 6 blocks from our hotel, forcing us to walk with all our luggage. Sorry, sorry, was all Tajiri could say, as I shuddered 2 huge boxes and wondered if maybe an apologetic phone call to Eric Bischoff might have been a better move than coming here. What are we doing here? I kept whining to Tracy, as even in the winter weather the sweat began trickling down my brow. We finally checked into our hotel, where after dinner with a Japanese superfan named Masa, who still remembered me from my trip in 1991, I tried to sleep. As a small promotion, IWA had to cut corners to survive. It flew all the wrestlers on coach, bussed us for hours every day, and lodged us in some pretty crummy accommodations. At $300 a day, I was, with the exception of the Funker, the most highly paid gaijin, foreign, wrestler by far. As a true Japanese icon, Terry had a deal that was pretty lucrative, but some of the South American wrestlers were working for $75 a day. The next day, we headed for the venerable Japanese venue Korakuen Hall. Korakuen was a 2,200-seat auditorium on the 5th floor of a Japanese office building, which was used by several different promotions. It was not unusual for 3 different promoters to use the hall on the same day, and as I walked in the dressing room, a few women wrestlers were still in the process of packing up. When the doors opened up, I was waiting anxiously with stacks of cactus shirts in front of me and a jumbo marker in my hand. I was already dressed for my match, which would be a no-rope barbed wire death match pitting Terry Funk and Japanese daredevil Shoji Nakamaki against me and Tracy Smothers. Interestingly, 4 years before the invention of Mr. Socko, I was wearing a long tube sock on my right arm, as I was planning on doing the cactus clothesline over the top of the barbed wire. I knew the possibility was strong of catching my arm on the wire as I went over, a possibility that could do massive amounts of injury to my skin, veins, and tendons as well. The sock, as it would later in my life, would protect me. The fans streamed in and actually made a beeline for my table. Apparently, Cactus Jack had become a pretty big name in Japan due to the Japanese media presence at my American shows. Even with the 25% cut going to the office, I knew my payoff was expanding rapidly. I came out during intermission when the young boys took down the ring ropes and replaced them with spools of barbed wire, which they ran in lines and zigzags to resemble a set of 4 flesh-eating Roman numeral 10s. My music was playing as I unloaded my last shirt. I could hear IWA boss Mr. Asano calling my name, but damn it, I had merchandise to sell. It didn't matter that I was going to get literally torn up out there. Shirts came first. I often imagined how ridiculous this would look if applied to a regular sporting event. Frank, we're waiting for Holyfield's entrance, but he doesn't seem to be ready. Wait, I've just got word that he's at the gimmick table pushing his t-shirts. Don't worry, a few more Polaroids and the champ will be on his way. I came down to the ring and received a tremendous ovation. They were chanting my name in unison, which in reality sounded like cactus, cactus, and more like cactusa, cactusa. It was flattering nonetheless. When Nakamaki and Terry made their way to the ring, they chanted even louder for Terry, which sounded a lot more like Telly. The hall was sold out, and the fans were primed for mayhem, which I began delivering. Funk and I climbed up the first level of the stands and began going punch for punch in front of the awestruck fans. The Funker picked up a chair and slammed it over my head. Japanese folding chairs were strange in that they were not as heavy as their American cousins, but were put together in such a way that a good shot could pop the seat straight up in the air. Back in the ring, Tracy was putting the boots to Nakamaki. Tracy was a tremendous wrestler who could just about do it all, but for some strange reason, he didn't have the inclination to risk life and limb on the dangerous barbs. Nakamaki was a different story. Not talented in the least, Nakamaki was a 40-year-old, non-athletic former journalist who had cult hero status as a guy willing to do anything. Wait, I think I just described myself. But unlike me, Nakamaki was not much of a ring general. He just kind of lay there screaming and bleeding. But his reputation as a daredevil was well earned. He was willing to do anything, and he was dying to try some of it with me. Actually, Nakamaki looked up to me, and although we didn't speak each other's language, we had a verbal exchange that we shared for the next 15 months. You danger man, I would say, before a laughing Nakamaki fired back, No, you danger man. I gave Nakamaki a couple shots and set him up by the wire strands. I backed up and raised my sock-covered arm. The fans stood with anticipation as I charged the Japanese danger man. Even though videotaped evidence later showed me to be moving rather slowly, it was still a dramatic moment, as the two of us flew over the top, my arm dragging the wire down with it. I looked at my left arm and saw 2 angry gashes that revealed the white cells underneath. I lay there recovering as a small amount of blood began to well up inside the gash. I don't have a medical degree, but I find it strange how some gashes never bleed and some small cuts seem to bleed forever. A month later, I would attempt the same move and wouldn't be so lucky. The wire snapped on impact and I went hurtling forward, absorbing the fall on the top of my head. I could hear the Japanese reaction of "ooh-ah," but was temporarily unable to do anything but breathe. I eventually got up and won the match, but the move bothered my neck for several months. The Funker returned to the ring and we fought to the dressing room where I had a special prop waiting. A young boy handed me a lighter while I disposed of Funk. I grabbed the lighter and reached for the chair that had a towel strapped to it that had been soaked in kerosene. I put lighter to chair and presto, the fire chair was born. I walked down the aisle accompanied by the Japanese chorus of ooh-ah and slid into the ring. I wound up the chair and brought it down across Nakamaki's back. Ooh-ah! With the help of the fire chair, Cactus Jack was victorious in his return to Japan. Unfortunately, my trusty fire chair would almost cost Terry Funk his life 10 months later. We set out the next day on a long bus trip and arrived in a country town with about 4 hours south of Tokyo. I was feeling pumped from the previous night's sellout. Sellouts were rare for a small group like IWA. I was about to find out just how rare. We were booked inside a 1,000-seat arena, and like most days in Japan, arrived about 5 hours before the show. The young boys would spar and do endless free squats while the gaijins threw a football, did some sit-ups, read a book, or used whatever time killers they could. I was actually able to see quite a bit of Japan during these 5 hour pre-show periods. Because most of the shows took place in smaller cities, we could walk around the towns and appreciate the ancient culture. I much preferred the beautiful mountains of the Japanese countryside to the mass of humanity in Tokyo. Unfortunately, our attendance reflected that lack of mass humanity as well. For the next week, we were lucky to draw 100 fans, even with the legendary Funker on the card. In truth, the fans never quite forgave Terry for coming back after his emotional retirement tour in 1980. He was still an icon, but not as revered as he was in his heyday. IWA had made the mistake of booking arenas in the southern part of the country under the premise that it would be warmer there. Well, it was slightly warmer, but the buildings weren't heated in the south, and as a result, the gaijins would all huddle around a portable kerosene heater in an attempt to stay warm. When our music played, we'd take off our winter coats and hit the ring to entertain a very small group of fans who made very little noise and were dressed in very warm clothes. Mr. Asano had liked me right away. Asano was a multimillionaire whose value ranged from $50 million to $500 million, depending on the Japanese real estate and stock markets. Even with his wealth, he threw around nickels like they were manhole covers. But he was a big Cactus Jack fan, and he made it clear that he wanted me back on all his tours. Asano also wanted to play up my deathmatch image. He'd been impressed by my barbed wire heroics, and he wanted my name to become synonymous with skin-tearing metal. So for the rest of the tour and for months afterward, I wore a barbed wire necklace around my neck. I wrapped the stuff around my leg to drop legs and around my arm to drop elbows. When I talked to the press, I sometimes had it wrapped around my whole body, and no, I'm not talking about the rubber-tipped barbed wire that is currently used in WCW. For a while in the IWA, I truly did look as though I was born to be wired. The final match of the tour took place in the city of Guma, where Terry and I were scheduled for another no-rope barbed wire death match. We were booked into another small venue, which again would be void of both heat and human bodies. This match was being filmed for commercial videotape release in Japan, and that fact made a great deal of difference. It was not as if I hadn't been wrestling hard in front of the frozen minuscule crowds, but video always upped the ante, even if I knew I'd never see a cent of the profits. There's something about commercial video that represents immortality because I know that when I'm done, commercial videotape will be the greatest representation of what my career stood for. Pride was another huge factor. I'd come over here specifically to wrestle Terry Funk, and now I had my chance. I realized the crowd would be small, but the Japanese media presence would be large, and several 100,000 match fans would read about it and see photos of the match. I also had the belief that I could help make this promotion a success. Unlike WCW, the rug would not be pulled out on me, and the ball would not be taken away from me. I knew that when handed the ball, I would be given the chance to run as far as I could. I saw this match as the night I took the handoff. With fewer than 200 fans in attendance, I felt in my heart and in my mind that January 9th, 1995 was the most important match of my life. As the wire went up, I listened to a song called Winter by Tori Amos, which is, in my mind, the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I was all out of t-shirts, and in truth, wouldn't have sold them this night because I was completely focused. As the song played, I became more and more intense. As the beautiful images in her song peaked, so did my ability to see brutal images in my mind. I was practically flying on adrenaline, a claim I can't make for many future matches with audiences 100 times as large. The Funker and I tied up, and I took over immediately, pelting him with forearms to the side of the head. I whipped him toward the wire, but he put the brakes on and pointed to his brain as the crowd applauded politely. I stopped him once more and again attempted to whip him into the hungry wire, but this time the Texas Broncos slid out underneath the bottom strand and beckoned me to follow. I did so, and we proceeded to tear both the building and ourselves apart. A few minutes into the action, I threw the Funker through a row of chairs and sought out my special fire chair, which I had hidden under the ring. At this point, the fans, while not many, were standing in a frenzy as they realized that something special was going on inside that freezing gym. A young boy handed me a lighter, and a second later, the fire chair lived again. I brought the chair down across the grizzled Funker, and then, in one of the stupider acts of my career, placed it on the gym floor. The gym floor in Guma, like most buildings we worked in, was covered with a rubber tarpaulin. In retrospect, I was lucky the whole building didn't go up in flames. I followed my stupid decision with an equally dumb one. I allowed Terry to hip toss me on the blazing chair. I rolled off the chair, and the young boys doused me with large buckets of water. My shoulder would turn a shade of gray and stay that way for several months. I rolled into the ring, and the Funker followed me, this time with the fire chair in his possession. I put the boots to Terry and wound up with the weapon one more time. Bam! Went the chair, and Terry's back literally smoked from the impact. I placed the flaming chair on the canvas, where it promptly was doused by the young boys. These kids were so nice and dependable that I made it a point to be nice to them. Also, I knew that these kids would be future stars in the sport and didn't want to be the kicking up my ass all over the Orient in the years to come. Once in the ring, I made a decision that would make my previous two bonehead moves look like Einstein's theory of relativity. Go ahead, Terry. I'm ready, I said as Funk launched me toward the wire. Of all the moves I could think of, I was about to try the most dangerous of all, a hangman in the barbed wire. I knew the results could be truly disastrous, but I was determined to give Mr. Asano his $300 worth. I took flight and caught my head and neck between the second and third strands of wire as the rest of my body sailed over the top. The timing was perfect, but the wire gave way, leaving me sitting on the arena floor with sharp barbs still lodged deeply in both my pinkies. I gave a firm tug from my seated position and became free, but in doing so exposed huge chunks of flesh. Bleeding badly, I lay on the floor as the Funker retreated to the back before returning with a special present of his own, a flaming branding iron. I got to my feet and Terry made a charge. He brought the iron down toward my face, but I blocked it, creating an artistic standstill where the fire from the iron danced off the reflection of my bloody facial features. A boot to the stomach broke the struggle, and I lay in the ground as the Funker stalked his prey. I had taped gauze to my chest and had soaked my shirt in water, but the iron still hurt like hell as Terry ground it into my chest. I took about 2 seconds of this, enough time to snap plenty of pictures, before retreating to the relative safety of the ring. Once inside, the action continued until, at the 17-minute mark, Terry covered me for the pin. It was an exhaustive, brutal, and blood-soaked battle, but I was glad it was over. But it wasn't over yet. Terry had rolled outside the ring and collapsed. In a story that Tracy Smothers loves to call, Terry was moaning my name. Cactus! Cactus! I was on the other side of the gym by this point, on my hands and knees, when I heard his mournful cry. Terry, where are you? I cried back, and a slow, emotionally moving crawl began. In Japan, pro wrestling has always been considered more of a sport than it is in the US, and the fans gathered around to see this culmination of a mutual show of respect. Cactus! Cactus! Terry! Terry! Cactus! Terry. We were finally together, and I extended my badly bleeding hand. Terry shook it, and the two of us embraced as the 200 in attendance applauded wildly. Then yours truly ruined the scene as I forearmed my hero in the head and gave him a quick pile driver on the floor. Ooh-ah! Came the response as I left a trail of my bloody handprints crawling away from the shaking Funker. Back in the dressing room, the other Gaijins were in a state of disbelief. Tracy Smothers couldn't stop commenting that it was the most brutal bout he'd ever seen. Terry, who dressed with the Japanese boys, all the other Americans dressed with their own group, was met with an equal reaction in his dressing room across the gym. Japanese media came in and barraged me for photos as I proceeded to cut one of the best promos of my life for the video, even if no one could understand what I was saying. I wanted to shower off the blood that seemingly ran from everywhere, and in truth I was cut in over 50 places. My hands were especially a mess, and the chunks of flesh that peeked up at me from my fingertips were grim and painful reminders of the price we pay for doing what we love. A large gash on my forehead continued to pour as I reached for the comfort of a hot shower. No such luck, however, as in addition to the lack of heat in the building, there was, you guessed it, no hot water. I felt like I'd already endured enough pain, and I just didn't feel up to exposing my naked, bloody body to a stream of ice-cold water. Instead, I took a quick horse bath, rinsing my hands and face as best I could before throwing on a set of clean clothes. I sanitized my forehead gash with liquid new skin and wrapped it with gauze before looking to my hands. Most of the cuts were not that bad. A few were even superficial, but my pinkies were a mess. I surveyed the situation and made my first aid move. I put about 5 drops of the new skin into each wound and then packed the meat back into its hole with my fingers. Tracy then wrapped athletic tape around it, and we walked out to the waiting bus. We drove for an hour and then stopped at a rest area to eat. Terry had known the first leg of the trip with a group of fans known as Funk's Army. The rest stop menu was real basic when it comes to Western food, and most of the time I just opted for spaghetti. After the meal, Terry rejoined us on the bus. We sat there reminiscing fondly about our match and wondered about marketing the video in the U.S. It was a definite blending of the thrill of victory with the agony of a defeat, as our tales of the past and ambitions for the future were tempered only by the stale iron stench of our own blood. Owen. May 29th, 12:46 a.m. I've been sitting in front of a TV monitor watching the World Wrestling Federation Over the Edge show as I wrote about Japan. I saw a Blue Blazer vignette and had to smile. Owen Hart was one of wrestling's best performers, and his adventures as the Blazer especially were favorites of mine. I returned to writing and looked up minutes later, expecting to see the Blazer in action, but I saw a large crowd shot instead. Pat Patterson came into the room and said that Owen had fallen off a catwalk some 60 feet above the ring and was being worked on by paramedics as we spoke. As part of his Blazer routine, Owen was scheduled to descend from the catwalk in true Blazer superhero fashion. Apparently, he had problems with his rigging apparatus and he had crashed inside the ring. I said prayers for Owen as I raced down the hallway, and I arrived just as he was being wheeled into the ambulance. The situation looked grave as one of the EMTs stood atop the stretcher leaning over Owen and attempted to revive him with cardiopulmonary resuscitation. We learned an hour later that Owen had died. I will talk about Owen at length later on, for he was truly one of the funniest men in the business, and Owen Hart's stories are always a favorite in the dressing room. I travel with Owen frequently, and I can honestly say that he was one of the nicest people I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. He was kind, he was honest, he was considerate, but most of all, he loved his family. I never met Owen's wife or his two children, but I felt as if I had. He spoke of them warmly and often, and my heart goes out to the three of them, as well as the entire Hart family. He was a special man, and he deserves a special place in heaven. The world knew of Owen Hart as a great wrestler, but he was an even better human being. Goodbye, my friend. You left us way too soon.